I will officially call the Blackstone Millville Regional School District school meeting to order. Is there anyone else who needs to call their meeting to order?
I call the Blackstone Board of Selectmen's meeting to order.
Second.
And I call the Millville Capital Program Committee meeting to order.
Second.
For quorum.
Call the Blackstone Finance Committee meeting to order.
I call the Blackstone Capital Committee meeting to order.
Second.
And I second yours.
Anyone else? Going once. Okay. Well, great. I think this is the most we've had at the table in a while, and I truly appreciate everyone making the effort to come. We'll start with, I guess, introductions, working our way around the table, but my name is Jane Reggio. I sit on the school committee.
Tim Howell, School Committee Blackstone.
Amanda Gilmain, School Committee Millville.
Carrie Gaudette, School Committee Blackstone.
Tammy Lemieux, School Committee Blackstone.
Tara Larkin, School Committee Millville.
Jim Watson, Finance Committee Blackstone.
Scott Heberton from Director of Facilities, Blackstone Millville.
Jerry Finn, Millville CPC.
I'm Greg Smalley with DRA Architects.
Ross Nickel, Capital and Finance for Blackstone.
Brian Scanlon, Finance Blackstone.
Brad Weissman, Finance Committee Blackstone.
Aubrey Bono, Finance Committee Millville.
Zach Zelinski, Finance Committee Blackstone.
Lauren Taylor, Town Accountant Blackstone.
Ray Bolso, Selectman Blackstone.
Robert Kuchvitz, Selectman, Blackstone and Capital Outlay.
I get you.
Ryan Chamberlain, Selectman Blackstone.
Steve Tringali, Capital Planning Millville.
Peter Caruso, Millville Town Administrator and Capital Program Committee.
Jennifer Gill, Board of Selectmen Millville and Capital Planning Committee Millville.
I don't want to miss our Zoom guests.
Oh,
Aaron?
Aaron? That's Aaron. Oh, we can't hear you, but anyway, we can see you. We can't hear you.
She muted herself.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. Matt Aaronworth, Assistant Superintendent. Jason DeFalco, Superintendent.
And I know you didn't even get a chance to sit down, but would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Tanya Polak, Board of Selectmen.
Ryan Barry, Blackstone FinCom.
One more. Somebody's got to squeeze in.
Break the slide down. Come on in,
I got more packets coming around.
Carol, you are going to help.
Need them to be.
I know that we have a very busy agenda tonight with a lot of information on it, but I do have one item that came to my attention today that I need to address with the school committee and the town of Millville. I am saddened to say that I received a resignation letter from one of our school committee members, Miss Amanda Gilmain. We will miss you terribly, but we will accept that, understanding that life changes happen and people have to make decisions best for themselves and their families. So Amanda will officially resign on March 24th. March 24th. So the town of Millville will need to look to replace that position, seek nominations, and whenever you all can schedule a meeting, the representatives from Millville will need to be present as well, and together would make a decision on a replacement until the next election. I am also aware that no one took out papers for the Millville seat, so there essentially will be 2 seats that need to be filled in the town of Millville. So, but I believe Blackstone people took out for all positions, correct?
Yeah, and I believe the position that made your ballot can accept write-ins.
Yes, so we can't replace the second one until after the election, because there has to be the opportunity for write-in. Yeah, but that would only fill the elected position, not the resignation. Yep. So I accept your resignation sadly, and I appreciate the work you have done. Okay, at this point, I will turn it over to Dr. DeFalco to talk about the budget.
Great, thanks, Jane. Good evening, everybody. It's really nice seeing all of you in one place. Finally, been a long time.
And to see your faces.
Yes.
Most of you.
Except mine, because ironically, I'm recovering from COVID. So what do you know? 2 years, right to the bitter end here. But anyhow, it is really nice to see you all tonight, and I'm looking forward to delving into some pretty important topics. I know ones that we've had an opportunity to get into with some of the individual committees and boards. But tonight we are all here together to process and unpack these as one large group, which I'm really looking forward to. And so with that, we're going to start by jumping right into our FY23 budget, the draft of our FY23 budget. We've put together just a very short presentation, and frankly, by this point, a lot of this information is probably old, which is actually a good thing. That means that we've done our job. If by the time we get to this stage, you've already seen most of the information leading up to this point. But as an important reminder, our district improvement strategy is what anchors our budget, and making sure that we align our fiscal resources with our district improvement plan is critically important because that actually puts outcomes to the dollars. And you might be familiar that we are in the process now of developing what we're calling Blueprint 2.0, which is our next strategic plan. And we'll be implementing our new strategic plan as of July 1 of 22. So really excited about the good work that our steering committee is doing on that. So more to come in that area. We want to open again with a little bit about who we are and who we serve, who are our students. And while I certainly won't go through the list of demographics with everybody, I do think it's important to note a couple of pieces because this issue does come up when we have this conversation. So just to try to get ahead of it, if you look at the last two bullet points, the second bullet point from the bottom, the 46.7% being high needs. If you're wondering what is high needs, what classifies as a high needs student, it is a student that is eligible for free and reduced lunch, and or is a student with special needs, and or is a student that is an English language learner. So you can see that about half of our school district, I believe at this point it's about 52% qualify for free and reduced lunch. In 2010, we were at 10%. So just again, to give you kind of a sense for our new folks that are around the table, our district is now just over 50%. And for high needs students, we are just under 50% of students that are either free and reduced and ELL or special education. So just to give you a little sense of the student population that we are very lucky to serve each day. As I mentioned, our fiscal resources are attached to outcomes. So just very quickly, I do want to highlight a few important data points on slide 4. We heard a bit about last year, MCAS, we know was very different. We know last school year was a really different sort of year. And collectively, as a state, our students did not perform well, certainly did not perform the way that we are used to them performing. As far as student proficiency on English language arts and mathematics, but also as far as our student growth goes. You might be familiar with the student growth percentile, right? The average percentile of growth is 50, which makes sense. The state average last year was, I believe, 33 in math, and 33 in ELA and 30 in math. So you can see on average, the students just collectively across the Commonwealth did not grow. And we know that that was through interruptions of the way that we actually implemented our learning model, which I will just remind our group, as far as the most in-person instructional time, BMR was 6th in the state out of all 365 public school districts, regionals, and all the charter schools on top of that. We were 6th in the state for in-person learning. I say that because we're very grateful for that. We didn't do that day off a week for cleaning and all that stuff. We just did that stuff every day. Because if you look at our results, you'll see while we did not perform what we normally do, we definitely held our own as far as state averages. And again, that isn't our benchmark. That's not what we're looking to do. But we shudder to think what our results would have been like if we didn't have as much in-person learning time as we did and push as hard to get our students in school every day the way that we did. So that was an important piece. The other important piece that I do want to highlight here is our graduation rate. It was about 4 or 5 years ago, we were hovering between 86 and 88%. And consistently over the past few years, we have been very strong at the low to mid 90% range. Last year, we were at 95% for our 4-year on-time graduation rate. And our dropout rate is about 2% school-wide, which last year was about 7 students. And a couple of those students were students that moved into the community. We had only seen them for a couple of days and they withdrew, which is an unfortunate situation, but it is something that can happen anywhere, frankly. But our high school team has been very hard at work to make sure that we're maintaining very strong graduation rates and doing everything we can to keep our students very much engaged in the learning process and to graduate on time.
Dr. DeFalco,
Please.
if they were only here a couple days before they withdrew, that still affects our numbers, not the previous district?
It does. And you know what's really quite interesting? I'm glad you asked that because, all of us in the Blackstone Valley have school choice. We open up our schools to each other, and we have students that choice in, that choice out. You can have a student that school choices into our district. We had this scenario, actually, was here one day. The child came one day and withdrew. And that's our withdrawal on our
It's like
records.
a last chance and we get dinged.
We saw the kid for one day. Yep, the young adult. So that happens occasionally.
So our budget process to date, unless there are other questions regarding that, it's one of those really bothersome things, and I will piggyback on that. Dr. DeFalco and I have had, and our leadership team have had the discussion of, it's not the right thing to do for a district to push a kid out to another district so that they can drop out or leave the district. And we refuse to do that. We're not using our students as pawn pieces and like just trying to shift money around. We're trying to do what's best for them. So despite the fact that we may get some students for a couple of days and then they leave, you're not going to see us shipping kids out for a couple of days and then having them leave from another district, because it's not what should be happening for our kids. So, and on that note, about money, our budget process to date. So originally, as you all know, we all agreed to a timeline. We bring that forward to the school committee. And then we have our principals and our cost center managers identify school needs. The principals were focused this year on identifying the ways that we still needed to remediate both the academic and social emotional learning gaps that kids are coming into this year from COVID. They also were asked to focus on their school instructional focus. So we really want to make sure that everyone understands where a lot of districts took the mantra of, we've got to get through COVID, we've got to get through COVID. Our mantra was, we've got to move our kids and our school system forward despite COVID. We've got to deal with COVID. We've got to make sure everyone is safe, but we've got to keep moving forward and keep our focus on the instruction and the learning that happens in our buildings. And that was really emphasized with our principals this year. And we said, you need to make your assessments, talk to your departments, connect all of what your requests are to your school improvement plan, which is threaded back to our developing district blueprint for improvement, as Jason mentioned, our 2.0, which we're still piecing together. It's coming along splendidly. And then they presented their budgets to Jason and I, and then we actually, before we even did the workshops, we went line by line through every single item on the budgets that were presented to us. We took both an actual expense for the current year, and we took a 5-year analysis of what was spent in the last 5 years for each one of those lines. And we reviewed them and we made adjustments. And I can say we removed at least in that initial run through over $500,000 worth of expenses. And we were getting into, do we need to have this much slated for electricity if we haven't hit that benchmark yet? Do we need this in the, for oil? Now, I probably shouldn't even say that word, but we went through and we really tried to take a conservative look and say, where can we potentially tighten things up? After we did that independently, Dr. DeFalco and I, we had the principals present their budget workshops to the communities and to the board, to the school committee. And then we again, then after all of the principals and the cost center managers went through their priorities, we met as a school committee and district administration and went back through every single one of the lines in the budget, and we went through and removed other pieces. And by the time that we ended, from our initial proposals for this year, which came directly from the principals, we would say it was a needs-based budget. By the time Dr. DeFalco and I went through it, and then the school committee went through it, we were able to reduce those costs by about $1.9 million. We spent a lot of time and effort reviewing everything and trying to make sure that we did everything we possibly could to get this budget to a place that is palatable for the towns. And you'll see when we look at the assessments why that's so important, because there is a huge shift that you'll see for the MLC, the minimum local contributions. But that is where we are now. So we've gotten the budget to a place where it's still initial, but we think that it's palatable, and that's why it's the topic of conversation here tonight.
One of the pieces that we have tried very hard to do in terms of, and if you're wondering, well, how do you reduce a budget by that amount and still maintain programming? And it's because of this slide you're looking at. We have written just over $2 million worth of grants that we've been successful in attaining. Most recently, we've applied for another $150,000 grant that we hope will be purchasing our math program for grades PK through 8. So we have tried very hard to do what we've needed to do outside of just running the system, but in terms of growing the system on a lot of different grants, and have been very aggressive about going after different opportunities that will bring really robust programming to our students and extra support to our staff. So you'll see a list here. What we did was we identified what year we are in of the grant, because we're all over the place in terms of year 3, year 1. Some the only outstanding grant is the math program grant. That's not even listed here. We didn't put it on. But it's important to highlight so that the community understands just how hard the school committee and the school district is working towards trying to get as many grants as we can to do the lion's share, particularly of the new work, the work that's outside of the typical running of the system, if you will. I thought I saw a hand up over here. Did somebody have a question? No?
I will say, while it's a smaller grant, we actually just, right before we left for break, were notified that we were awarded another $20,000 grant to help our work for anti-hate crime. It was a hate crime prevention grant. So our diversity and equity.
People can hear you.
I'm sorry, I apologize. I was saying we just were notified right before February break that we are receiving a $20,000 grant, which is an anti-hate crime grant from the state, and we're going to be applying those funds to try to help our diversity and equity and inclusion work that we've been fostering very strongly this year.
Just a question, if I may. When you say year 3, and you say biomedical pathway, whatever it might be, you have $75K. Is that the total amount of the grant, or is it $75K for the 3 years?
That was the total amount of the grant.
All right, so these are totals and then periods of time that you've spent those totals down.
Correct.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Dr. DeFalco.
Please.
We had a workshop a couple months back, and I'm trying to figure out, and like I was looking at last year's numbers as far as enrollment. So right now, from kids going from middle school to the high school, what's the numbers? It seems like I guess your projected number from that was, we're losing kids going from 8th to 9th.
Yeah.
So I guess for engagement purposes with, the new math program, stuff like that, what are we doing moving forward with keeping the middle school kids engaged so that once they get up to the high school level, keeping them there and then doing all the programs that you guys are offering right now staying in the district and not going to BBT, not going to Aggie, stuff like that. I guess keeping the kids in the district from kindergarten, keeping them engaged all the way up, obviously is a tough thing if you look at all the numbers. And then with obviously budget season, is there something we're doing at the elementary level, at middle school? I know, listen, honestly, I have 2 young kids. They love the STEM program. They come home, we talk about all this stuff. But what are we doing as far as that?
That is a wonderful question. So yes, so we see essentially 2 main exit points for our students in the system. We see the 5th to 6th grade jump, and then we see the 8th to 9th grade jump, which makes sense. Those kind of tend to be the natural breaks. But a few things. So we have done some real, I'm so glad you mentioned the STEM piece at the elementary school, because that is something that we have worked really hard to put in place. And what we did was we started out with our STEM programming and pathways at the high school, like the biomed, Jerry, that you just mentioned. But we actually backed that all the way through the system. And what I mean by that, you'll notice if you look at the grants page, you'll see a green technologies grant. And you'll see another grant that we wrote for the middle school specifically. That was a $100,000 grant that's around career development. That's artificial intelligence. All of the STEM work that we are doing at the high school, we backed into the middle, and then we brought on the STEM program at the elementary school with our 2 new STEM teachers to bring that all the way down into K, so that we have a robust STEM pathway all the way through kindergarten and through 12th grade. So we do have quite a bit of programming like that in place across the system to help maintain students. One of the pieces that we are going to be putting in place for next school year that we're really looking forward to, because we have done a lot of work between the middle and high school around the extracurricular and athletics, but are now adding the academic piece to it. So we are going to be implementing next year a program called dual enrollment, where we actually will have 8th grade students that are interested sign up will be participating in 2 high school courses for credit as 8th graders. And they'll actually take those at the high school. So they'll start their day at the high school, then we'll shuttle them back to the middle school for the rest of the day. And the idea is that if they decide to attend our high school, which we're hoping that they do, we'll give them credit, so that they actually start the high school with 2 credits under their belt. Now that's intentional, because what we need to do is free up their schedule on the back end, their junior, senior year, so that they can actually enroll in our dual enrollment program on the other end with Quinsigamond Community College, which we're piloting this spring, where they will be taking full college courses for full college credit at a fraction of the cost. We're talking a couple $100 for a college course, so that by the time they leave BMR, they will have the opportunity to not only have QCC courses under their belt with college credit, but they also, through our array of advanced placement courses, will have an opportunity to take AP classes, get that 3 on the exam, and be able to essentially exam out from having to take those courses at the college level. That's one piece. The second piece that you see throughout the grant update is all around career development work. So it's all around engineering, it's all around STEM, biomedicine. We have done a ton of work to try to reach those students that are really career focused, that want to do courses in cybersecurity, advanced manufacturing. We're a small high school, so it can be a challenge for us to build a variety of pathways for one or 2 kids that might be interested. So we've put in pathways that we can, like engineering, biomedicine, but then we, through the Blackstone Valley Superintendent Consortium, wrote a $500,000 or $450,000 grant, which we were successful in achieving. And we have all now opened up our high schools to each other's students. So for instance, Damien Gaudet, he's one of our video lab teachers. He teaches a course at night for credit for Blackstone Valley High School students across the valley. He's got 16 students that are taking courses here at night for credit. Just like our students go out and take welding or take cybersecurity for two examples, video game design. So we are trying to be as innovative and creative as possible to keep our students with us. I will also say, and I know this is later in the conversation, but the new facility is a shot in the arm. So, as we think about the facility project down the pipeline and what that could do for our community and could do for our enrollment, it could be a really good shot in the arm for the community itself.
And I mentioned those, I know there was a piece that you were mentioning, the budgeting process. I mentioned the 1.9 million. I can say there were no reductions to our core programming and our instructional programming with respect to our career pathways or, even enrichment opportunities that we're offering the students.
Yeah, and like I said, listen, same thing I told you in the workshop. The way that they're learning math now compared to how we all probably learned it is completely different.
Yeah.
So obviously with going through the pandemic and stuff like that, I guess I was more looking at ways to attract more kids into the community at the younger levels with offering the different things. I think what we're doing right now is great because obviously I can have a conversation with my kid about, electricity versus, Fortnite, at the dinner table.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think that some of the kids at that age level probably aren't where maybe my kids are. And different things, band, art, sports, anything like that at the middle school level could potentially help us as well.
Sure.
In bringing more kids, which also brings in more kids to both Blackstone and Millville at the same time. Obviously that costs money because now you're talking about fields, equipment, stuff like that. But at the same time, it's a lot of kids, the parents, their wish for their kids is a professional athlete, something like that. But it starts at that level. So I guess maybe if there was a little bit more to that than what you guys are already doing, if there was an avenue we could look down, might help.
I know that we've had conversations with the town, and a lot of that, when we start looking at our athletic programs and some of our extracurricular stuff, some of it also has to do with like the town programming, the offerings for the little leagues. So we want to make sure that we're engaging in these kinds of conversations, because how can we make sure that we get these feeder programs, bringing the kids in? And similarly, I know you're mentioning elementary to middle, but we look at trying to keep the kids here no matter what. And to your point, which is an excellent one, like our drama program, our high school drama program, I believe is now predominantly middle school students. And we make sure that those kids get over to the high school so that they can participate in that. Because every minute that our kids from middle school or in younger ages get into the high school and feel more a part of that community and all of the great things that are going on, they're that much more likely to stay.
Well, I think the band.
Yep, band, all of it.
Parents that play musical instruments now as adults started at a young age. If you get your kids involved in that at a young age, that's going to want to keep them following up. And then you offer if you don't keep, a B+ average, you can't do X, Y, and Z, which helps us with the academics as well. Same as all the high school sport team. Why is that an avenue we could go down? Maybe.
And Mary, I think Mary had a question too.
Go ahead, Jim. Go ahead.
Different topic though, or same topic?
It's really not, my question, I know we're not here to discuss programming, and you can decide if you want to answer or not. But when you mentioned they come here for the first couple periods, are we doing block scheduling, rotating scheduling? And you can answer that after if you want.
Sure. The middle and high school align the schedule for those first couple periods, so it's not an issue. So by the time they get back here, it's their third period here.
So the first two periods are the same every
Yes.
day? Okay, that's all.
I want to caution folks when we talk about students making other choices. I think what we're trying to design is a seat for every student, but we got to stop blaming BVT, because both of our towns pay money for BVT to run BVT. We can't send nobody to BVT, and then there is no, BVT, and then we're sitting around the table saying they don't have enough students. So I don't think BVT is the issue. I know it's the one we go to because it's where larger numbers seem to be, but there's a natural progression for students who value that, who welcome that path line. And that needs to be available, as do all these other path lines, as do rigorous academic path lines. And we have to make sure that between what's available in our communities, including our community school of a technical school, that there's a spot for the students, so that they're not going to BVT, but they're not going to Mendon Upton, or they're not going to Bellingham. But when we present these programs where they can have the benefit of what Bellingham offers by staying here, there's some real value in that. Or they can get their AP coursework done here and not have to go to a traditional, more academic, rigorous type of a school, and they can start doing that dual enrollment at the middle school, at the high school, into the college. I mean, that's what is happening right now, of students really getting college credits before they leave their high school, because they can't afford college. So if that opportunity becomes more readily available, then I think you have parents on board. As for developing more extracurricular or more sports teams, we got to work with our community recreation department. That's got to start at age 3 and 4, and we can't let every notice in the town be sign up in Bellingham, sign up in Uxbridge, sign up in whatever.
Yep.
So
and that's what's happening.
And that is exactly what's happening.
But that's where we're losing. I think we're losing kids because they want to
play with their friends in other schools, right?
And listen, I get everybody has different financial backgrounds or whatever, but a young family looks at, okay, we want to put our kids in a great school system, and they want to progress from kindergarten to graduating.
Yep.
But at the same time, are you putting your child in a school system for the learning portion of it, but you still want them to have the outside of the learning with their friends? If they live in a neighborhood and everybody goes to Bellingham or Franklin or wherever to play different things, band, whatever, we're losing.
Agreed.
We're losing them at that level, but we're losing them at a young age and then trying to make up for it on the back end with the high school, with doing all the stuff that you guys are doing right now.
And I think, Jane, if I'm hearing you correctly, is I think we're saying just similar things. And I think what the challenge is, we did just receive a notification for a neighboring town for Little League, like T-ball and Little League, because I don't think we have that here anymore, right? And so exactly to your point, right? So you get your kindergarten, first grader, second grader that's now going to go to either town A or B to play Little League, right? Because we don't offer that here. And then they make those friendships and relationships, and they realize at some point, I can go to Bellingham or Uxbridge or wherever for middle school or for high school, and people do. So, I think what I'm hearing you say, it's really a community piece.
It's a community piece. It's not a we have to do more. It's we as a community have to do more in our recreation departments, in our town, in our libraries, to get library programs back up and going again. That's how my child first made her connections, was in the library, at the reading group. Somebody down here.
No, I definitely appreciate, I would not have been successful here if I would have stayed here at BMR. I went to BVT because I was better once I learned with my hands rather than being lectured at, a chalkboard at that time. Or whiteboards. One thing I remember, though, I don't recall when I was growing up, was the school choice being as big of an issue as it is now. And things like Norfolk Aggie, right? They didn't get into BVT before. You would just stay, right? You'd sit on the waiting list, you'd stay. Now it seems like this is more of a regional issue. I'm just curious, what are the state's rules? It's just, there's no regulations on how far they can go?
Yeah, that is a really good question. So what we have found exactly what you just said, which is we'll have students that will apply to BVT, they won't get in, and so they'll apply to Norfolk Aggie. This year we have seen a very large increase. I believe we have received over 12, just the past few weeks, 12 new applications for students that want to study animal science. And so BVT doesn't offer animal science, right? That along those lines. So they can. So they're eligible. The times where we've had families that have applied for something that's similar to BVT's program, I've denied those. I get those applications, and I've lost every single one. It goes to the commissioner after my review, and every one I've denied has been overturned, and the student has been able to go. And the message that I've been told from the Department of Education is, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Support that kid. And, I mean, I get it, but we're also supporting them at a $30,000 tuition to Norfolk Aggie. And so what we are doing, just so you're all aware, Ms. Fowlis, the high school principal, and I are going to Norfolk Aggie actually next Thursday, and we are touring the facilities, as I think we talked about one of the subcommittees conversations, and we are looking at an environmental science, animal science type program and what that pathway might look like. I mean, if we have that big of an interest and we have the need in our region, then we need to start looking at developing programming for that.
And that's happened in like pretty much the last decade, right? I mean, I don't remember that being a big thing.
The past couple years, the applications have increased. I've never seen as many as I've seen this year for animal science.
To add to that is, and I think this is, I think one of the catches to school choice was that if you school choice to a different town, the parents are responsible for transportation. And I think prior to the pandemic, that was a non-starter for a lot of parents. But many parents now in today's world, a lot of us work remote. So that ability to drive a kid back and forth is no longer as much of a blocker. So I'm purely speculating here, but I suspect that with a lot of the workforce now being remote and likely staying remote, that some of those blockers that prevented parents from considering school choice aren't there anymore.
Yeah. It's probably a valid
Which is
point.
why you're seeing a spike, in the last year or so.
I thought we were paying for transportation.
We do for those, but not for all.
Yeah.
You're paying for it.
But not for,
Yeah.
Not for the town. Not when they go to Nipmuc.
Transport like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
we don't pay
for that.
No,
Yeah.
you're right.
But if they go to
Only Aggie and
BVT or
Tri-County.
Norfolk Aggie, we do.
Any technical school.
Yeah.
Question school.
Jason,
We'll pay for it.
question.
Not,
Only tech schools.
Any
Yeah.
technical.
Yes,
Right.
but not for.
not the choice, not the other choice programs.
Does have to pick up that tab.
Correct.
Would be the-
For the choice or charter.
Town would be the one.
The town, right.
Yes, it goes to the town.
The 30,000 number you suggested for Norfolk Aggie, that does not include transportation.
Correct.
That's correct.
So what is the transportation cost on top of the 30?
That's
That I,
town,
yeah, the
that's
town
you
covers
got,
that.
that you would get that.
That's what I'm saying. So, when people are watching this tonight and they're realizing it, they need to realize that 30K, plus there's a transportation number that goes on top of it.
Closer
So,
to 35.
that's not a discussion that normally is had, but in the past, it's like, it's not 30, it's
Right. It's 30 plus.
30 plus.
And what do our kids get? $1,000.
Sorry.
Going back to the grants specifically, do any of these grants have budgetary implications beyond their life?
Oh, yes, yeah. So some of them do it. If you probably saw in some of our workshops that we had some discussions about them, particularly the Project Lead the Way. So the biomedical pathway or the manufacturing. We had a very robust conversation about sheep brains in one of our meetings because there is, and you have to essentially get the grant as a startup, but then over time the consumables like sheep brains, for instance, you have to replenish every year because the kids are dissecting those kinds of things. So so there are in some cases some consumable costs that are reoccurring, and some are not so significant. So the computer science pathway, it's really kind of upfront costs, and then from there, which we have a lot of the technology already, it's a very minimal amount. But some are a little bit heavier, like the medical detectives, and because it requires more stuff for kids to interact with.
Do you have resource constraints regarding pursuing grants? Or do you feel like you have the resources that you need to apply for everything that you should?
So as far as it's really myself, Matt, Jill, our learner services director, and the principals that write most of the grants. So if we're really intentional about what we look for and what we apply for because we wanted to support the district improvement plan. And so we try like heck to go for everything that we can. And we'll even write, grants for things that we already have grant funding for to try to free up that money. So we're doing that right now with our summer programming. We already have grant dollars set aside to run our summer programming the next 2 summers. But the Department of Ed has just released additional dollars, so we're going to be writing grants for the grants that we already wrote to do what we're doing to free that money up for something else.
What percentage of your grants that you submit would you say are successful, just off the top of your head?
There is only one that we have applied for that we have not got. So we have a pretty good track record. And I think part of it is we really use it very well in terms of the resources for exactly what we say we're going to use it for, and we are able to show outcomes as a result. So we have a really good track record.
Thanks.
Anyone else? It's really hard for me to see around corners, so if you do have something, just get somebody to get my attention. All right.
So we've already talked about a lot of this, but this is essentially what's driving the budget. I think it's really important just to note a few pieces, really focusing on our district blueprint, that new district improvement strategy, which will really just be a deepening, I think, of what we're currently doing. When you see things like non-academic barriers, we're talking about those social, emotional, and behavioral issues that have really been drummed up from the pandemic. We've seen some pretty significant issues across the system as a result of that. So staying focused on making sure that we get our students back to a real strong kind of mental health situation or status. Focusing on our curriculum work and continuing with our work around pathways and dual enrollment. As far as resources and staffing, this is a little bit more in the weeds, so to speak, of what you will see in the budget. And again, just to highlight a few, you'll see the curriculum work that we've mentioned, the career readiness work, the social emotional learning work, our work around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Matt mentioned that we did write a $20,000 grant. It was competitive. I think we put in for 50, Matt, but I think we got 20. Which is fine. We'll work with the 20. So we'll be able to really fund that work through a grant. Our after-school programming, we're very much focused on trying to keep our students engaged after school hours through different extracurricular activities. At the complex particularly, you might be aware that we did write a $175,000 grant, 3-year grant, which we got to run summer programming and after-school programming called 21st Century. It is a super competitive national grant that tends to only be funded in urban settings, but we were successful in our application, to your question about how successful we are with that. And then as far as positions go, there are not many. We have essentially a 0.6 history teacher, which I know sounds a little strange, but at the middle school we have teams. So it doesn't run like a junior high, it runs like a team. So you have an English, a math, a science, and a social studies teacher that services the same 100 students. We have a weird dynamic here with our numbers and our enrollments where we have like a split team some years. So you might have a team of English, science, math, and social studies teacher that has 2 7th grade sections and 2 8th grade sections, depending upon the numbers of in each one of those classes. And so what has happened essentially over time is we needed a 0.4, which is like basically a part-time social studies teacher, to pick up essentially a few sections of history that we needed covered. Well, we're at the point now where we really do need to work on restoring that teaming model. So we just want to add the 0.6 back to the 0.4. And I will tell you, by the way, it is really hard to find a teacher that wants to teach 0.4, which is just a few hours a day, frankly. And it's not like you can only have them work, 2 days a week or 2.5 days a week, because the kids get history every day. So they have to be in that kind of rotation. So that's really just an equity issue and trying to restore the teaming model with that. And then we're looking at 2 additional building subs. And so what a building sub is, we're all familiar with substitutes, God bless them. I'm sure we've all had our fun with them in the day when we were in the classroom as students. But what we try to do with the building substitutes, and each building now has one, they come every single day. So the students know them. So it's Mr. Smith, but Mr. Smith is the building sub or the permanent sub that gets plugged into the classroom where the teacher is out, because they have the relationships with the students. They build those over time. So we're looking to add 2. We've had a huge attendance problem through no fault of the staff, frankly, but just because of COVID. And we're not entirely sure where this is going to go in the fall. So we want to make sure that just in case we have 2 additional building substitutes online. And frankly, you're either paying it as a day-to-day or you're paying them as a permanent sub anyways. So either way, we have to pay for the sub. The permanent subs make a little bit more. It's about $10 more a day. But they come every single day and they're part of our staff.
Are they part of the union?
No.
Okay.
I see people reflecting on what they must
see a
have
lot of
done to the
smiles.
subs, what they must have done to the subs back in the day. So please tell your children not to do the same things you did. Be nice to our subs. They're so
Don't give out
difficult.
as much homework as what I'm being told right now, okay? So,
We can change that.
So you can see from a staffing perspective, there's very little that we're looking for with that. Everything else we've removed as part of the 1.9 million. There was a lot of additional that was in, but we backed it out to get to where Matt is going to talk us through.
Get to the page, nobody with eyesight can read.
So you have you do have a copy. In
You
your
have
packet.
you also have a slightly larger copy in your package of just the assessment page, which I'll be happy to walk through
I can't
for what people can see of it.
Okay.
And again, this section for these conversations tonight, I know we wanted to focus on the assessments, so how the impact was going to be on the towns. So this is just the revenues for the most part. But if you take a look in the top left column, here's that starting conversation that I hate to say deflates us right from the beginning. If you see the school choice sending tuition and the charter school sending tuition, which are numbers that we just get given by the state, we have over $1.5 million that is going to be removed from our Chapter 70 funds that's paying for those kids to go elsewhere. So again, the primary focus is keep our kids here once we have them, and then try to get them back. The number you see, the all other number that says the $27,035,259, that is the money that was determined by the district. So that's what we budgeted for both our students that are coming to school here and also our out-of-district placements for special education. So those costs are also part of that $27 million number. Our special education out-of-district placements don't get taken off of the top like the charter school or the school choice. We have to budget for them. And so that's another a significant expense that we do see. You can see that, as always, we've tried to apply every source of funding that we have to offset the cost to the towns. At the top, we said the use of additional circuit breaker money. If you take a look, somewhere toward the middle of the page, you'll see a $630,000 number connected to circuit breaker extraordinary relief. So that's us saying that all the circuit breaker money that we anticipate coming in next year, we're going to apply toward the budget. And in addition to that additional $175,000 is stuff that's banked right now. Circuit breaker is one of those funds that you're allowed to have a small bank there, because you don't know when special education students are going to move in and come at extreme costs. So again, we don't want to deplete that fund, but we do know that the times are tough, so we're going to apply additional money from that circuit breaker fund. You can also see in the ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 lines, the two blue ones, you'll see that it says 23 plus 22 rollover. So when we presented our ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 plans for our budget, ESSER 2 was a multi-year grant where we had the funds for this year and next year. ESSER 3 we have for this year, next year, and the following year. So what we've done is, where we're able to shift expenses from this current fiscal year, we've shifted them from the ESSER funds into, at some point, like we just had a school committee meeting, voted to move two of the STEM teachers out of the ESSER funds back to the general fund because we're showing some salary savings there right now. And basically what that does is the more we can kind of shift out of the ESSER funds and pay for through our general fund this year, that allows us to free up that money for next year and the following year. Versus if we just leave the money in the general fund and let it fall down to the bottom, it then gets certified as part of our E&D, which we then have to wait until potentially February or March of next year before we could even access it. So what we've really been trying to do is maximize the use of these grant funds so that we can get everything that we need to for the upcoming year, and we are always shifting where those priorities have to be. Again, I won't go through every single one of the lines, but you can see our Chapter 70 receipts below. You can see our regional transportation, our estimated receipt. We're hoping that as the budget process moves forward, that's one of those numbers. We always say at the end of the year, people say, well, where did this money come from? We thought you were only going to get X amount. The actual state budget changes between now, and they won't finalize it until probably we're 3 months into the school year next year. So when we budget for these transportation reimbursements, it's really our best guess. But if we're looking at try to be a conservative 85% reimbursement rate, it may come back at a 90% reimbursement rate. So we may see a few $100,000 extra there. So we just don't want people to say, where did this money come from? We never talked about it. We are as open from the beginning of this process as we can be, but we just hope that everyone understands these numbers change. They're very preliminary.
On that same note, Matt, and I don't mean to interrupt, sorry about that, but we lobby our state legislators very hard because, even recently the governor released a supplemental budget because their revenues were so much higher than he expected, and we were on the phone immediately with Senator Fatman and Rep. Soder to tell him we put that in transportation reimbursement. Is that there's certain lines that you can get additional funding for, so we'll push hard for that to happen if we can, because it only comes back to the system. It's better for the towns that way to do it. So we do push hard for that when we can.
And so that you guys know, many of you may, but that regional transportation reimbursement that we talk about, when the state initially wanted to incentivize districts to regionalize, they said that they were going to reimburse 100% of the transportation costs. That never really came to fruition. No. So now we look every year and we hope to get 85%. Mm-hmm. If we get 89%, we celebrate. But we've never seen that 100% reimbursement that was originally spoken of.
Matt, first I'll say a lot of these when we're at the State House, a lot of people would argue that the formula's skewed, especially for rural towns.
Yeah.
Right? So a lot of these they would say are very underfunded. But one of them jumps out at me, the special education. I looked on the other thing and it said 18.4 students have special needs. Is that a high number? That seems high to me. Is that the trend that we're seeing across the state?
Yeah, so that's about 300 for us. It's about a little over 300 students. I think it was 320, Jill, at the last count. Jill's our special ed in the back. Jill, if you want to join us.
Hi, Jill.
But so we're about 18% of our students are students with special needs.
And the reason I say that one above them all tends to historically be super underfunded by the state, right, out of all of them. And it just stood up to me that 18.4%. I mean, is it, when you say special needs, is that IEPs?
Yes.
They still, okay.
Yep.
The state average that is around the state average right now. Yep. But it's around 20, it hovers around. That's 20%.
I mean, you guys have been doing this a lot longer, and I always stayed away from that side of the fence, but that number's grown over the last 15
absolutely.
Years, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
And will grow significantly in the next 5.
Yeah. So just to...
Right, Tammy, you want to respond?
Amen to that. Yes, that's right. I just wanted to say also, for clarification, for this district, unlike other districts that are high school only, our special ed covers pre-K to age 22. So there are students who are at the high school, well, in the high school building or collaboratives that are 18 to 22 that have significant needs, and so they are part of our numbers, I would assume. Yes, Joe is nodding yes.
And that's something unique to the regional school district?
Well, no, it's not unique to regional, it's just, when you're at a vocational school, you typically don't have a high number of those students that stay 18 to 22. But typical districts that have the regular, I don't know what we call ourselves, typical districts, they have that 18 to 22. And I think those particular students are such high needs that the typical person who thinks about a high school student don't think about them, but they tend to be a big part of this number because oftentimes they'll have need one-to-one assistance, or they go out to the vocational experiences, and you need some more staff to do that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to clarify for the group that for us in BMR it's pre-K to 22.
And just one follow-up, and I'm sure you guys have given this in some breakdown form in one of the packets. Do we have like what the average student costs, and then what an average student with an IEP would cost? I assume we have that somewhere.
We do. Yep.
Just because Ryan mentioned being, unfunded, the state seeming to unfund stuff. I know I spoke to Dr. DeFalco about this, but just speaking with the state, we just want to keep in mind the minimum local contributions are going to go up year after year. The state is going to start relying on the towns more and more. Yeah. So that's just something to think about in the next 5 or 10 years down the road. We got to start, the state's going to start giving us less and less money in the next few years.
To your point, the state has been very clear. They have a formula which is their percent effort yield, which they have calculations for essentially every single thing that happens in your towns, and they determine, okay, what percentage of the total amount are you actually able to pay? But the goal of the state, and it is the number that they're moving towards, is 59% of the entire budget should be locally funded and 41% should be offset by state funds. So that's their target. Their target is to have the LEA, the local education authority, or the towns pay 59%. We're not there yet. And as you mentioned, you'll see our MLCs are going to keep increasing. And I'm sorry.
Mary, did you have something? And then Mr. Watson had.
Yeah, I don't know if so I was looking at the next category down, the offsets, and 2 questions. What classrooms are we renting for $35,000? How does that money come in?
So we actually have classrooms in Millville Elementary and at the high school that we rent to BICO Collaborative.
Okay.
And actually, we have some of it's helpful for us as well. We have a couple of our students that are attending those collaborative programs.
Yeah, no, that's good. I know Milford has a huge BICO program that helps them out quite a bit.
Those are the 2 that we have.
So then, revenue athletic user fees. We're not making money, I'm sure. We're just we're charging them a portion to offset the cost.
Correct.
How do our fees align with similar demographic towns? Because I don't want to deter students from playing.
So some towns have moved to not having fees.
I know it's a huge cost.
We felt we were not in a position to do that, particularly in this budget season. However, we're not we're not the highest. We're on average with people that do charge fees.
For our demographic. I'm not comparing us to Mendon.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
We also have the sliding scale.
Yeah.
The same for the free and reduced lunch. It's the same structure.
There's a scale.
Yeah.
Yes. On the numbers for last year are not here, and I assume that I have them somewhere, but most of the people don't. The numbers for 22 for the minimum local contribution are given, but we don't have the total assessment that's coming for Blackstone. And as part of the Finance Committee, that is very critical.
Are you talking about the last year's total assessment?
I'm trying to figure out how much additional money we have to raise. And without having last year's numbers in front of me, it's difficult.
So if you look at the breakdowns, if you look at the bottom, more toward the bottom, that second column, Mr. Watson, that breakdowns Blackstone assessment.
Right.
Yeah, but he wants to compare this
I
to last
understand,
year.
but you have to look at, if you look at the increase.
I don't see an increase number.
Yeah, you've got to, if you look at you'll see the MLC increase on the top. Your minimum local contribution, you'll see the increase of $480,000.
Well, they have it for the minimum local contribution.
I understand what he's asking for.
What's this thing?
Okay,
Yeah.
but they don't have,
I understand that.
part of it is the additional contribution, that is the, that's the hot number, okay? And we can't really compute it.
So if someone has a pen handy, I can tell you right now. what
I have the
everyone's-
calculation right here. The increase is $468,465.
460?
468, 465.
Dr. DeFalco.
Okay, and how much of that comes out of the additional contribution that's voluntary?
Well, that's just the total increase from last year to this year using the total number. Because you're gonna have an increase for capital, you have the increase for the MLCs. I mean, now that I have these numbers, I can go back tomorrow and plug them all in, and I'll send them to
So I was
everyone.
gonna say, if someone has a pen, I pulled up Millville's and then I can pull up Blackstone's. So
I got a pen, Matt, go.
So the FY '22 for this is Millville's. The minimum was $2,270,111. The exclusionary was $431,600. I'm sorry.
It's right on the sheet.
Last.
This is for last year.
This is last year.
Last year.
The only one that is on the sheet is FY '22's MLC.
I think you meant, yeah, you said fiscal 22, I think that's what I think you meant fiscal 21, right? These are fiscal.
No, we're
No,
22 right now.
We're in 22
This budget is
now.
23.
This budget's
That gets me every time. Every
So,
single
yeah.
time it gets me.
No, sorry, yeah, I apologize. So the budget we're looking at is for next year, FY '23. The
Gotcha.
numbers I'm giving you are the ones that I assessed for this year. So the Millville's exclusionary for this year is $431,600. Millville's additional was $538,030. And the capital assessment for Millville was $128,278. And I am going to try to pull up Blackstone's in 1 second. Here we go. Give me just a moment. So the FY '22 assessment for Blackstone, you have the minimum local there, which is $7,044,849. The Blackstone exclusionary, which is the transportation costs specifically, is $1,255,656. The additional cost to Blackstone last year, or this year, was $1,565,294. And the capital was $360,890. So actually, to your point, Mr. Watson, the additional assessment was decreased significantly. By almost about $280,000.
Okay. Did you catch the
Yeah,
capital?
360.
Okay.
Anybody else? Yes.
I had a question about the Medicaid revenue line item. I have younger kids, so this is a little bit new to me, but is this something that we've always done? Where we reimburse
So that's a great question. The Medicaid income that we get is for the services that we provide for special needs students that are covered through Medicaid by the state. So like we can claim for certain occupational therapy, physical therapy, counseling services, and then we get those reimbursements from Medicaid. In fact, I'm happy to say our Medicaid reimbursements this year came in significantly higher than we anticipated them to.
The staff has done a much better job of coordinating that through Jill's staff, through Matt's staff, of accounting for, of applying for those reimbursements, because it's not an easy.
And we kept this at the FY22 and FY23 numbers a little more conservative, because they actually just revamped how they assess what they're going to reimburse for Medicaid. So moving into this year, when we started this year, we were actually anticipating to see a loss in that revenue. But as it's turned out, we're doing well, as Jane mentioned, to the credit of all of our service providers who are keeping their notes, logging everything, and putting those claims in.
It sort of works like a law firm where you kind of keep track of your billable time and then submit it. But I don't know how this district, I know in my district, we do a week time study and then they base it on that, but that's how they track what they're gonna reimburse.
It's the same. It's federal. I think it's federally run.
I was just curious because I know that could be like a touchy subject for parents with kids with needs, just navigating something like Medicaid at the state level. So that's kind of why I was curious. Because I know like certain, things qualify no matter what. But on the parent side, it doesn't necessarily mean that, they're not also the one paying for something. So that's kind of why I was curious, does it just...
It's sort of a separate pot of money for Medicaid. So the Medicaid that schools get reimbursed don't detract from what a family might get for that same student. So I know I don't talk for Jill, but in my district, we have parents signed to just ask us to release the name of their student, and then we get reimbursed separate. And then if they have medical needs or whatever that can get reimbursed at home, then that happens also. So you're not signing away money to the school district, it's separate pots, sort of.
And to your point, it actually is a bit of a challenge at times, and we try to encourage families and say, we're not sharing this information publicly, this is just for reimbursements for the schools. But some families, once they see, okay, I'm putting my personal information and I have to agree to let Medicaid send something, they get very hesitant. And we're not sharing the information, we're not disclosing any private information, it's just putting in the claim to Medicaid that allows the school to get the reimbursements.
Yeah, which, I think it's actually great. I just wanted to be sure I understood, because a lot of this stuff actually would be covered under regular health insurance or private insurance and stuff, but if the school's providing that same service in district, you have the opportunity to get reimbursed for it through Medicaid, I encourage it. So I think that's great.
That was partly my shameless plug to anyone seeing this, to say, if you see these forms that come to fill out for the Medicaid, just fill them out. We're not disclosing private information. We just use that to help support the education that goes on in the district, so we can get those funds back.
It was actually a reminder, because I know we got it and I don't remember sending it in.
Yeah. So when I made that comment, it wasn't to anyone specific here. I just like my shameless.
I gotta go find it.
Shameless plug.
Anyone? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks for your collective efforts to get to this point. I have 6 questions / comments, if that's all right. And I'm just
We'll take 3 to start, and then we'll pause.
Well, just clarify. No, I appreciate Matt and Jason came to my office back in January, and we went over things in great detail, and I really appreciate that. And I'm just trying to go back to where you were then and how you got to here. So if I look at the number 27035, is that comparable, Matt, if you remember, to this thing, to this number down here? which was showing like a 6%.
It is.
It is,
backed out
okay.
that
So
much from-
you dropped
yeah.
that by almost 900 grand from what we talked about.
Correct. Yeah.
Almost 2 months ago.
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to understand that.
Yeah.
Two, it looks to me like you're a little more aggressive on your circuit breaker fund planning in this. I'm not making any comments, I'm just clarifying
Yes.
from what we
Yeah.
talked about before. Okay.
Yes.
A question is, this shows 1,516 students. The question is, how many students are in this year? What the
That
population?
is, so this number gets based on our
That's this year. All right, so-
our October 1st number from this year.
All right,
is
so what did we
next
use
year's
in the
amount is.
22 budget is, I guess, really what I'm getting at.
And with a declining enrollment, they can't, the way that the Chapter 70 works, they can't give you less the following year than they did the prior year.
Yeah.
So even if our numbers dropped, we would still, we're a held harmless district, which means they would give us the same.
So I can find the number of students. It was just a question. We've got an overall 3% increase. That's 900 grand less than you had on your budget for all of the departments, is how I would simply describe it, right?
That was the, yep.
Yep. And I just wonder how many students you had. You have highlighted, does not include OPEB, so you don't even have that modest amount of OPEB in this budget? Okay.
Correct.
Not yet.
Not yet.
And
Next budget.
actually, I have 7 questions, sorry. And you have new CIP. What does that mean?
So the new CIP is that capital improvement plan that we just recently brought to the capital outlay committees of the towns. As that information was still developing and we haven't had a chance to prioritize that as a group, it's not included.
Okay.
But the other note that you'll see there is that the asbestos work is included in the capital assessment. So we did put forward some time ago that there was about $225,000 of anticipated asbestos costs to satisfy the DLS and the work we have to do at the high school. That is included in these capital assessments that are on this sheet.
Okay, so that includes the asbestos in the capital, it's not in the operating.
Correct.
And also, is it for Millville, the boiler debt
Yes.
service included in that capital as well?
Yes,
Okay.
and actually, one of the reasons why both towns saw an increase in the capital payments this year, or this coming year, is we still haven't finalized a bond to consolidate everything.
So you're
And
estimating-
there are principal payments due this coming year on both the boiler project and the Windows boiler project.
Okay. Last question that's hard to ask, I guess. Does this reflect provisions for contract changes that you anticipate? I know you're
Because
negotiating.
we're negotiating, yes, yeah,
Yeah, okay. And you're comfortable with that? Good.
correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well done.
Thank you. So,
Anyone, anyone else?
Just 2 quickies if I could. In terms of the transportation, I think you had mentioned, what was your percentage that you put in that you thought it was going to be? Did you say 75 or 85 or?
to be honest, I took that number straight off of the cherry sheet, the preliminary cherry sheet. I couldn't tell you whether it's the 85 or 86% number right now.
Okay.
That's
It's what was listed on the cherry
It's
sheet.
listed on the cherry sheet, so I get a clearer number going in that direction than just picking the percentage.
Yeah, okay. No, I was just curious because I think they're up around 90%, I think.
Yeah, I think you might be correct.
First time
Jerry,
I've seen that.
No, Jerry, yeah, it's getting up there, so that could be why that actually seems pretty high to start. They might be closer to 90
That's what I
already.
suspected when I saw it.
Yeah, you're right.
The other one is, Peter took one of them, which was the new contract obviously has to have a placeholder in there. That's life in the
It's
fast
in there,
lane.
yeah.
The other one is insurance. How would you make out on medical insurance this time?
So we actually,
We're still negotiating the, oh, you mean with the contracts, or you mean with the?
No, with the health insurance.
With the actual rate itself, oh, okay.
So we actually did very well with the insurance. The numbers that are here are reflective of exactly what the insurance ended up coming out to be. Because we ended up we did a post-65 plan to move some of our retirees onto Medicaid. They gave us a 3% discount in our bundled rate this year through Maya. And we ended up seeing, actually, they wanted to come at our dental with a negative 0.2%, and I made them give us a -1. And they came back and said they'd do it, because that's what I had budgeted for, and it's not tremendous compared to the health, right? You can get a little. You can get a little. So we got a -1. We got a full -1% on the dental, and our health insurance increase was, I believe, around 2.9. It's about a 3. Yep.
Question, since we're on health insurance, do you have a breakdown for how much is for the current employees versus the retired?
Yep. I believe we sent that. That was requested, and I think we emailed that information already.
I remember getting the email. Yeah. So
Okay.
They do have it? Okay.
yeah, we've received it.
Thank you. I don't
could
get
share with
email, I'll
Nova.
confess.
No, I know. I know, Jim. And I try to make sure if you've requested something specifically, I have it brought to the office. So,
I'll grab it from somebody.
just let us know if you need it. I'll get it to you too.
Send it again.
Anyone else? All right.
Okay. And just next steps.
Next steps are conversation this evening. Obviously, we really need to talk about the capital improvement plan and where we want to go with that, what direction we want to move in, or talk about OPEB, as Peter mentioned. That is not part of this assessment number right now. And we will, based on feedback as needed, we're going to continue to revise right up until the time of the public hearing on March 10th.
I have a question for Aubrey, actually. Are you good with this number? Do you have any?
Yeah,
Okay.
no questions.
Okay.
She's good on that.
So
Excellent.
That's how I roll.
You like that?
So just to point out, this sheet needs to stay in front of you, because if we change the next two items, this sheet changes. So if we have the capital improvement discussion, that changes capital lines potentially. If we have the OPEB discussion, well, not if, when we have the OPEB discussion, depending on what we can agree to as a group, that changes potentially the additional line item. So this one doesn't get filed yet, if you will. Right?
Are we okay to shift to OPEB?
We are okay to shift
We
to
have anarchy.
what? Oh, we're not?
No, I said if there's no OPEB discussion, there'll be chaos and anarchy
Oh,
from
no,
Peter.
Understood.
We're ready. We got
She was ready to come on.
That's
the
right,
table.
he was ready.
We anticipated.
Yes, certainly.
When you said the public hearing's March 10th, that's for your guys' budget piece?
Yes.
The public?
Yes.
And that actually brings us to the topic of OPEB. And I have to say, I am very grateful, and I would like to thank Brad for a lot of his assistance in looking at some of our numbers and helping to put together this information in a really, what I believe is really easily digestible manner. And to that, I will not try to do his work justice, but I will turn the floor over to Brad, and we'll just jump in as needed.
Wait a minute. Is Brad responsible for this super small
It's
print?
not just me.
I think you topped Matt. I think you're going to make us feel good about Matt after this meeting.
We're gonna focus on this.
We got this one. I can read this
on the big
one.
one.
But
Holy
I'm happy
moly.
to walk anybody through the details bit by.
I'm not even
Blow it up
50.
with
I
your
need a
phone.
magnifying glass.
Put your phone on photo and we can see it.
I don't take my phone out in
That didn't
meetings.
even work.
Like
I was going, it did.
The model itself, like the Excel file is, the messaging is all here on this sheet of paper. So I guess we'll start there. So we'll just kind of take a step back. February 2nd, we had the meeting with Parker from Odyssey to walk us through the OPEB liability, the funding status, specific to the school district, right? So the key takeaways there were there's a significant unfunded liability. Right? Those are the facts. Didn't get here overnight, built up over time. It is what it is, right? Take comfort in the fact that Blacksville, Millville is not alone. A lot of other towns, or with regional school districts, based upon Parker's insight, we have a lot of company in an unfunded liability. It's not uncommon overall that corporations, towns, whatever, would have an unfunded liability. So those are like the foundational, like the setting for what we're looking to discuss tonight. The first thing to begin to chip away at that unfunded liability is to develop a plan. You got to have a plan, and to agree to it. We'll revisit it over time at a periodic cadence. Once we agree to a plan, adopt it, agree to funding it, that is like the biggest step forward that can be taken. And that's what we need. That's what we need to do. Any questions before kind of get into a little bit of the model, things of that nature? We're all looking at this sheet.
Can we just identify the liability that's unfunded?
So the liability from the presentation that was shared with us on the 2nd, as of June 30th, 2021, the total number is $42 million. So $42 million unfunded liability. Dr. DeFalco, I think you mentioned at that meeting that we have allocated money.
Yes.
I don't understand.
$50,000.
$50,000. Okay, so there's a $50,000 allocation to the $42 million unfunded liability.
So just as a point of reference, at June 30th, 2020, so a year before, that liability was $33,956. So that's a huge increase in that period. So they must have changed assumptions and participation, I don't know what else, but that's significant, where previously the liability has been tracking at an increased rate of 1.1 million in prior years. So obviously this is something I pay attention to and have been concerned about. So you just identified a number that is a jaw dropper to me in terms of its increase. So I just don't want us to, this collective group, we're the brain trust of the two communities in this challenge. And I respect, you're absolutely right. This is a big, it is what it is. Other towns have to deal with it as well. But that's fairly, that's big new information to me, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, we're just, relying upon
Understood.
the report that was shared with us, and like anything, what was mentioned at that meeting, there's a whole bunch of drivers and levers,
Yes.
that can influence that number.
Yep.
So $42 million liability as of June 30th, 2021.
Brad, yeah, I just want to point out too that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there are no state, federal, local guidelines for the percentage of this liability that should be funded. There are no compliance issues that we are aware of regarding this unfunded liability. So the plan for dealing with it is we're dealing with it in somewhat of a regulatory vacuum. And
I understand.
Hopefully we can deal with it in a way that we can reduce it on a regular basis, which means that we have to sort of fund it to the extent that we're shrinking that unfunded liability annually rather than letting it grow. But otherwise, we're flying blind.
I just want to add one question. So right now the district's paying, I believe the number was 875,000, and that's incorporated in this budget here, correct?
Yes.
So right now.
That's for health premiums today.
Correct. Right.
It's not against the liability. It's not going into the OPEB fund trust. What's going into that is 25 grand, which is what the liability was tracking going up every 2 weeks.
Correct.
Okay.
No, I'm clear on that. I'm just saying, right now, they're paying their retirees $875,000, which is incorporated in the budgets.
Right, so that's people who are no longer providing service.
Correct.
That we're capturing in this operating budget. Yes,
Correct.
current period, right. Sorry, it gets my Irish up, I apologize.
That's okay. That's a good question.
And you're not the only one.
Yeah, I know.
To Jeff's question earlier, I don't know, if there's regulatory, statutory requirements, state funding level requirements, things of that nature. So yes, it could be an exposure, but at the end of the day, something is better than nothing, but probably I would suspect we would look to the consultants to say, is there anything that needs to be met or target? Some of the deliverables, some of the slides that were in here had mentioned that certain percentages of towns are less than 5% funded, others are less than 20% funded. Some of the comments or thoughts is we as a collective group should try and figure out what target we want to be at what interval, and then back into the funding level from there. Pick a year where we, in terms of what the funded liability is based upon this number, being fully cognizant of the fact that that number is going to increase over time. So put some thought into how much we fund it, but also as part of that, don't just fund it and not look back and not revisit it because assumptions are going to change over time. You want to make sure that you are still trying to achieve a certain funded percentage if that's the route you choose to go, yes.
In order to deal with the budget for '23 that we're coming up with, the reason I was trying to get the amount that we're paying out, for retirees, medical expense, that is one number. If you subtract that from the number that the actuary says that we're going to have to pay for 2023, that gives us a number, a discrete number that tells us whether we're paying more than what we expect or less, whether the liability is increasing each year. And there's no way we're going to be able to fund out of the current budget the 42 million, but if we can get to where we're actually lowering the amount of the liability each year, that is a significant step. And I'm just trying to figure out what number we have to put in to do it.
Fair.
Okay, we'll go here and then here.
No,
Mary was first, okay.
I don't know if this is legal. I was actually trying to find the article. I read something about, can a town bond our current liability? Because then it might not multiply as fast with the interest rates currently. And then we still have to contribute to what our increase is going to be. Is it possible to bond 42 million at the low rates right now to catch up while we, and then, next year we still have to put in an extra 50,000 or whatever? I don't know if it's legal. I don't know.
I do not know the answer to that offhand.
That is a good question for a very specialized attorney.
Something not in the purview of anyone sitting in this table, I'm going to guess.
Okay, but I will make one comment, Bonded debt in a period of high inflation like we have, where the year-over-year inflation is 7.5%, the bonded debt actually goes down, in value that you have to pay it back. The inflation number on the OPEB liability is horrible because the numbers on the 42 million are based on inflation of about 2.3%. And if they ever built in the 7.5% compounded interest, the number is humongous. So that's that's something to consider, whether you want to try and find out whether you can do it or not.
Yeah,
We're in a lot of trouble.
I got nothing there. That's way beyond me, Brad.
Yeah, it's over my head as well. But like to the point the question that was asked earlier, you had a number of $31 million and $31 million liability. Now it's $42 million, and it's that topic right there, that inflation, year-over-year growth, rising costs, and
Yeah, and whatever our assumptions, Odyssey tweaked versus the previous guys.
And I don't know the legality of it, but I can say if we were to bond on it, then it will go from an unrealized liability to a realized liability that we're going to have to make sure that we have. Not that we wouldn't, but we'd have to have that plan to make payments on the interest and principal.
It would be committed.
We'd have to, which could be a great thing. I'm just saying, it definitely changes the entire dynamic of it, though.
I know you agree we should look to fund it, even if you don't bond it, right?
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely.
I think we're all at that point that we agree.
Yeah, we absolutely.
I'd be curious what your analysis does. You did a lot of work here, it looks like.
After Brad goes through this, because I appreciate him putting the football down so we can all kick it now. But after he goes through this, I think it would be helpful to know, where you think you guys are comfortable at too, before we go around and around in circles.
There's a question first, and then I'll answer that.
I guess that was kind of before he asked it was, okay, so there's the elephant in the room after the last meeting. We know what the number is, and it's going to come to both towns agreeing upon, okay, so what is going to be the best for both towns and the schools?
Correct.
And now is it we've talked about the unfunded and all that. Do we put together like a subcommittee to actually really focus on this? Because everybody in this room right now could give their own opinion on what they think we should do.
So when we had our budget workshops as a school committee, so this will kind of answer Ryan's question, but when we had our budget workshops as a school committee, and we were looking at operational dollars, operation to keep the doors open, run the heat, pay the insurance, whatever, realizing there's, we all get, I think the people sitting at this table, there's probably not a single person who gets that this is an issue that has to be addressed. I think Mr. Watson has educated us enough that nobody's trying to avoid this. But what we're trying to say is we don't have the operational dollars to put into this that doesn't significantly impact, like I said, keep this page in front of you. So what's a plan that we can all agree on that's essentially going to be, we don't call it supplemental anymore, what do we call it? Additional funds that goes in every year above and beyond what the district thinks it needs to operate. And it's automatically like the additional funds start there. So let's say, and I am not advocating a number, I'm just saying, let's say we pick $1 million a year. And so whatever the percentage, 72% of that is on Blackstone's additional and 28% of that is on whatever the breakdown is, but that's where additional starts. And then anything that, the district needs to operate, to open the doors and to get the extra substitute teachers or not feed the children, because that's a different operational fund, but, they don't even use chalk anymore. Give me something. Keep the lights on.
Legwork on the school committee to write grants for that sort of stuff. I kind of see that's where that's going.
Right. So what I said is we as a collective brain trust that our towns have entrusted us collectively to do have to address this issue and have to essentially come up with a plan. So I'm incredibly thankful. This was shared with me, I don't know, a couple weeks ago probably, but and has been tweaked through time. I'm incredibly grateful for it because we, as a collective trust, are like, we know we got to do it, but we can't get money from a stone. Like the money that we pay for all of this stuff beyond what the state gives us come from our town. So what can the towns afford to do that we can commit to on an annual basis? And I know that it's 7:30. I know that nobody wants to be here till 10:30. But this has to be a collective group. Like, I don't think it can be a subcommittee and another small, I think we gotta lay some plans out. And I think y'all have to go back to each individual meeting, but before March 10th, and agree that we need to do something, and here's a good plan. So I think I'd like to have Brad continue to share, but Aubrey, go.
Just a quick question. Logistically speaking, when we decide on this, does it go into just the general assessment when we vote, or do we vote on it separately? Like, is this a separate, we're deciding what we're putting into OPEB as a community? And then the budget's a budget.
So when I originally said, we can't keep pulling from E&D, which we haven't even certified yet. We gotta get the towns to decide what the towns can commit to. We originally talked about another line, so that, in the budget, there's the school, because even though it's broken down in here into several different lines, in your budget, when it goes to town meetings, it's the assessment, and then it's the capital. And so the question would be, is it the assessment, the capital, and the OPEB, or is the OPEB in the assessment? And from our perspective, I don't know that it matters. But I don't know, I would get nervous that, townspeople would see an OPEB line and not understand and not I don't know the answer to that question. Short. Long, short.
Just my hunch, speaking just for me personally, would be to include it separately, because it shows a diligence toward knocking that down and not just like a major increase in an overall school assessment. But it's just me with my first impression.
I agree with that. To try to answer your question for a number, if we do the calculation of A minus B, gives you the number that's needed to keep the ship from sinking more in 2023. I think we need to have that calculated for the next meeting if we're going to go forward.
Brad, can you explain?
Do you want to continue?
Please. One thing before we get going here. This is, funding this OPEB number, this is a commitment just as much as anything else that's put in front of the students. And having that mindset is key. Even though it's not something tangible that we can touch, it's just as much a commitment that the towns need to fund as anything else. So, I don't yet have my arms around how it would be presented at a town meeting, a line item, funding sources, things like that. The objective here is to agree to a model, understand the importance of funding it, and then figure out where it's coming from, how it's presented. But the fact that we're at least having these conversations now is probably more progress than has been had in a long time. So that in and of itself is a positive step. So there's 4 different scenarios here in front of you. What they all represent is just 4 different models or funding contributions over a 20-year life. That's all that this was looked at, was a 20-year funding horizon, if you will. And it's varying contributions amount. I'll just walk folks through scenario A, and then it's going to cascade for all this other scenarios. Scenario A, years 1 through 5, we contribute $75,000. and that's collectively Blackstone and Millville, based upon whatever percentage the towns contribute. Where it comes from, how it's presented, not the topic. 6 through 10, it increases to $100,000, 11 to 15, 130. See how it increases through the life of the model. A, B, and C scenarios are all basically, at the end of the day, they're all basically the same amount of money that we're contributing over 20 years. It ranges from 2.3 million to 2.625 over the 20 years. So that's the number that it would cost the collective group over 20 years. What that would grow to is outlined at the bottom for each corresponding scenario. So our $2.3 million contribution over 20 years would grow to $4.2 million. Similarly, the $2.5 million would grow to 4.1, so slightly less. And what that is just due to the fact that we're funding larger dollars later on in the model, so it doesn't have the ability to grow or compound for a longer period of time. But that's the basics of compounding interest. So if we contribute 2.3, we'll get to 4.2, but in 2040, which is about 5.5% funded of our liability at that time, based upon the numbers today, or should I say February 2nd, that was shared with us by Parker.
All right, when you say based on the numbers, I can't, little font's not my friend. I assume you mean that that's on his numbers, that's what he projects. That's 5% of the projected value in 2040, right? For liability, okay.
Yeah. So if we get this foundation in place, facilitate the dialogue, I think that that's a key step. Any questions about the numbers, the logic, what went into it, some of the fine small print that folks can't read? Any questions that are out there?
Do we know where this would put us? I'm trying to think of, to Parker's presentation, what would this put us at, do you know, in terms of, because I think right now we're near that real bottom end of the like, do you know what this would put us in that?
This little stack bar?
Yeah.
So Ross is referring to the stack bar chart that was shared with us, and that's part of like the conversation in terms of where do we want to be at what point in time? We take a 20-year horizon. Do we want to be in this stack bar with 71% of the other regional school districts that are less than 5% funded? Do we want to be in the stack bar with 81% that are, between what would be between 5 and 15% funded? Like, that's the conversation that we would look to have, which would allow us to back into which one of these models do we want to go with. Scenario D, way off to the right, is if we really contribute at an aggressive rate. You can see we're contributing about $800,000 more, and that'll get us, over the life of the model, an additional $1 million. That's, just as a benchmark in terms of an aggressive model. But I think that, Ross, your question is basically one of the questions that we would look to answer to determine where we would look to fund the model.
That's great.
Looking at these numbers, and forgive my ignorance on this. This is an annual contribution, and I'm looking at scenario D. That's $50,000 annual contribution from both Millville and Blackstone.
Combined, 50,000 combined.
So Blackstone would pay right now about 72% of that, Millville 20.
Correct.
In year one. In year two, it might be 75, 20,
This is a sum of the dollar value that would be contributed for each of those years. The percentage that each town contributes is based upon the regional agreement in those applicable years.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So I have no familiarity with the report that you've got there, those bars. So first of all, my mother taught me, 2 wrongs don't make a right. And the bars you described of regional school districts suggest to me that most regional school districts aren't doing a very good job with this. So that's my vantage point. This problem, one of the first places I would look, so for example, if I look at your small print, I get exactly what you're doing here, and it is a valid approach. But what this says is at the end of 2040, there's $4.2 million in the trust fund, and the liability at the time is 77 million, right? And that's the liability in 2040 that the actuaries project out based on their assumptions. And most actuaries' assumptions are generally optimistic, is my experience. But in any event, the first place I would look is I would get their report like this, which I have an older one, and I pulled out the key pages that I would look at first and put them in a very special place, which means I can't find those pages. But those pages show you what the liability does if you don't fund it. And if you don't fund it, it goes to 77 million by 2040. One page shows that. Another page shows you if you wanted to get it down to zero, basically, how you would fund it to zero in 30 years, roughly. Those are the ones I've typically seen. And in that, you can get a sense of, you're comparing the liability, in this case is growing $1 million, 2 or 3, I think is what this suggests in the latest information, each year. And the funding to bring it to zero is somewhere in the neighborhood of what I've typically seen, 40 to 50% of that increase. So to get it to zero, the ballpark number I throw out there on the table is something that this group should consider is $500,000 is the right number. Because otherwise, you're looking at a $73 million liability net under option A that the kids that are graduating now are going to be stuck with, and their annual amounts that go into the operating budget. There's another schedule in these things that show it goes up like a huge, I almost used a bad word, number. So they're massive dollars that we're dealing with, and this is great. You've put something down on paper here for folks to digest and think about, but I think I would be curious to know what's in their report on those two schedules I described. So that would be very useful to foster the discussion. Do you follow what I'm saying, Aubrey?
Yeah, no, because yes, I do. I mean, my instinct was just, okay, so does that get us to a better spot if we have still this huge liability at the end of the day that's not funded? Like, what are we working toward? Are we better off if we're 4% funded? I mean, are we? I actually genuinely don't know. I guess we're 4% better off, but is that worth the effort versus like actually trying to get ahead of the problem?
So $500,000 funding liability is not, on an annual basis, is not a realistic number based upon past performance.
No, I get that. Yeah.
A lot of people are interested in talking about this now.
If you had, Brad did a fantastic job with this. If you had to play around with the Excel he made, it's great. One thing to point out is, further down the line, and I'm talking like, 2 generations from now, we could be, with the market return, we could be looking at using more non-taxpayer dollars to be funding this, which is really important. I mean, I'll be long gone. Most people will be long gone, right? But our, children's, whoever's paying these taxes, will be using non-taxpayer money to fund this. I think that's why it's important to start this now. And the second thing was, just procedurally, I think we wouldn't vote on this tonight. The school would have to decide an amount and then bring that down the pipe to, the Board of Selectmen and the budget, then FinCom, and then town meeting. Is that correct? Like, we're not voting on anything tonight.
I think
not ourselves, right?
So.
Go ahead.
Our takeaway would be, or for us as a Board of Selectmen from Blackstone, would we would want to go back to our town administrator and we want to kind of digest this with our town accountant and kind of see where it's going to play. Because keep it in pack, we have the school over here, we have the municipal budget over here. At the end results, what's the taxpayer? What's the repercussions to the taxpayer? Because the other elephant we haven't talked about yet is the capital on top of all of this. And we're already looking at a 6.83% increase over here.
No, 3.
So,
What are you looking at for the 6?
Increase.
That's the MLC, but you got to go to the bottom line.
3.89%.
3.89, okay. But on top of that, so, we're gonna have some growth here, so.
Yeah,
I don't think we're not prepared to.
No, I don't think towns, I think we have to come up with a plan, because I think whatever that plan is, we have to propose that moving forward, and we're required by your policies and state regulations to submit a budget to the towns within certain days of your town meeting. So if there's gonna be dollars contributed to this, and it's gonna be a budget submitted through the school and not individually through each town, then we have to come up with some decisions, and we're running on deadlines to do it. I don't think anybody is expecting that any one of us sitting in this room can ask the towns to commit to $500,000. Like, it's just not, it's not a realistic even discussion to have to start. What I took away from the actuary meetings was that at some point in time, as your money is also growing, you're also able to take money from that. So to pay, so that $870,000 that we're currently paying, if you've got $4.2 million in there, and the towns decide this is a tough year, we don't have $275,000 in year 20, you have the ability to draw from. Did I take that wrong?
No,
That's accurate.
That's correct.
But it can only be applied for.
It can only be applied towards the benefits, but it can reduce
Yes.
those benefits, which I think is as much of the, I think there is incredible importance in paying down or paying off the liability, but in a short term, there's a much more at stake in creating a plan that's committed to by both communities, that is a consistent plan, that's not a surprise to anybody, that's not a, what do we have left over in our 24 cents this year that we can put 25 cents to. If we have a consistent plan that everybody commits to going towards, that becomes part of the school committee budgeting process, that goes annually to the towns to support this effort, that starts to build this, we've done something.
I guess that's my point. That at the end of the day, we can say we've done something, but the impact it makes is very small. Like very, 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 very small, right?
But we're also making up for something.
4 years of doing nothing.
Exactly. But we also need to set up, and to touch on what everybody said, is going forward, everybody in this room not going to be here doing the same thing in 20 years. So let's at least set it up going forward to where it financially for both towns and the school district makes sense.
I agree with that. Jane, your comment is 100% correct. You gotta get started. There's no us. We have to get started. I understand the commentary about being behind. Is it even relevant? Why even get started if we're this far behind? We'll never catch up. Valid. But if that were the case, people that are behind in retirement would never save more. You gotta start, and you gotta put something away, even if you're behind, even if it's a small percentage. It is an obligation or a liability that the town has. Towns have.
Okay. So far, the discussion has assumed that the towns have to pay the money off. What you're looking at with OPIT is undeniably a fringe benefit on your payroll cost that hasn't been accounted for properly for 20 years plus. Okay, so forget about, if we just take out the 42 million liability and not do it. If we talk with the unions and present what the problem is, if we're going to give the unions a 2 or 3% payroll cost, if you even take 0.1% of the 2, that comes up to a sizable amount of money. And it really is for the employees, or otherwise, when they're 75 and need the medical insurance, that's going to be when the system collapses. So that's an alternate source of funding that needs to be dealt with.
Those discussions are underway.
Okay.
That's all I'll say.
Okay, but I
all
have to
set.
get that out there.
I don't know who went first.
So as I'm looking at this, and I'm seeing, you know, the millions of dollars over a very long time, what I'm kind of wondering right now is, in terms of this model, how can we get to a point where this becomes self-sustaining and that amount is not coming out of operating? So I'm not looking at it to say, like, for me to get to the 42 million to pay it off. What's it gonna take to get to a little bit more than enough to pay for whatever it is year over year without it having to come out of operating? Because I'm looking at this 875 number and then saying to myself, you know, at some point, you know, let's say it's 10 years from now that we don't no longer have to have this amount in the budget. We're only contributing maybe 100,000 a year at that point to OPEB. We've kind of saved money by shifting it at that point. So I think that might be a more reasonable way to try to figure out.
It's hard to predict inflation. You don't know what inflation and what's going on in the world economy right now. You know, we don't know what that's going to be. I think if I throw something out on the table, I think that the district should come up with they think is the ideal plan and then come back to the towns with it and then let the two administrators with their boards. I think you guys more know where you need to be because you know, I think, what is it, 5 years from now or 2025, it's 1.25 million. 1,250,000 was going to go from 875 to 1,250.
I'd have to double check.
Right, but I think that's what Parker was saying in the meeting.
Yeah.
And I think as a district, if you guys came up with a number that you think would work, and then bring it back to us, I think that would work.
I can speak with Parker and say, hey, you know what the costs are that we're currently paying out, to your point, Mr. Watson. And then, you know, where do you think we need to be in order to try to start bridging that difference? I think to Tanya's point, though, the biggest piece from the district is these amounts, once you start looking at actually making an impact, these cannot be coming out of operating costs from the school system. And I appreciate everyone, again, I'm speaking just for me, having looked at the school finances, and I appreciate everyone that's around the table because, you know, when we start talking about it, it's like we've got to do what district's got to fix OPEB. We've got to address OPEB. And it's like, you are correct. We all have to address OPEB, but to take that money out of classrooms, you know, is the struggle. So we can definitely help formulate what an appropriate number might be, but I think I like the point of then the town administrators or board members can go back and say, how do we make this happen without looking to the district and saying, every year you're going to need to shave $400,000 out of your operating budget.
Yeah, can I jump on that? Because right to that point, we spent over 9 hours looking at 5 years of actual data, trying to just forecast FY23 correctly to get the numbers to where, you know, Janie was saying, keep them in front of you, get them here. And that's hoping that we forecasted correctly with, you know, oil and gas and electricity to try to get a number that's manageable for everybody. So if we had to go back to look for enough, we wouldn't be able to find that.
No, but I do think, to the point, I mean, I think we need to just continue this discussion a little bit more. I think we need to come to an understanding that you all, us all, are expecting to see an OPEB line, and I like the idea of a different line, because then you know what track was chosen, if you will, and what to expect. It's like having your 5-year plan, but you got a 20-year plan in front of you. So I like the idea of that rolling, well, I love the idea of the rolling plan, but that's me. And so, but I guess, you know, I guess I'd like to hear more from you all in terms of, you know, will we kill you now with 75,000 or kill you in year 19 with 275,000? I don't know.
Does Millville have a funding source for their town OPEB right now?
Yes.
How much?
So we're probably 25% funded right now. It's a small liability. It's a few participants. But funded, not in the budget, we've been funding through, stabilization transfers or free cash transfers.
And the reason I ask that is because I think it's going to be very important for the town administrators to get together, because last year, although we put in 150?
Yep.
200,000, based on the markets, we brought in, 780,000, right? So there could be an argument made that when we have a year like that, we might want to dial back 1 year on one side to do the other. And I think it's important for all of those discussions to definitely have. Obviously, that can't happen here, but that's one strategy to the bigger picture.
That's kind of why I was asking the question, like about it being self-sustaining. That way, maybe we're not putting in such high numbers down the line, depending on what we've got in there and wherever that return may be, just to cover the costs that we have at the moment.
And you've been very aggressive about funding your town OPEB liability, from what I understand.
Is anybody in their contracts with employees in the towns having the employees pay a certain portion right now, other than BVT? Which pays $5 an employee.
What's that?
Can you repeat that, Jane? I'm sorry.
Is anybody, now that you're negotiating contracts with employees in the town, is anybody having town employees pay towards this liability? BVT has, BVT does $5 per paycheck?
Good
Per
question.
paycheck.
I don't.
We have a town account right here. Our town
None
account.
of our unions pay toward OPEB.
Yep.
And
but if you really think about it, as you had said, Mr. Watson, if you really think about it, the people who get the benefit
Are the employees?
the
Future
instructors, the professional staff, by working with those other employees, the OPEB type employees, they're actually getting the benefit of that. We had an opportunity to convince the union that because of that benefit, we felt as if they should contribute something to it, almost in the same line you're saying. And they agreed. It took some sessions and took some, arm twisting, but we were able to get it, and they felt compelled that they said, they're right. If it wasn't for these folks, I wouldn't be as successful as I am. And you're right, I want to participate. So they participated. And it was a good way to do it. My one question is, have you looked at E&D too? To see if you can take a percentage out of E&D every year or something like
So
that?
that was our original, when we did the 50,000 originally, that was our original thing. But like the towns, getting those numbers certified, haven't been fast and
Haven't
furious.
been certified yet?
Nope.
No.
Really? Wow, that's interesting. But I'm saying, you do have a certified number at some point in time that you have an E&D. You could take a percentage out of that and be able to use that as a contract.
Yeah, so we can, and that's how we originally did it, but we have chosen this year to use that percentage to offset this already.
Yeah, that's the bad thing about when you drain the water and there's none left.
There you go.
You get thirsty real quick.
Mary.
I think Jen was first.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, you were, I'm sorry.
That's
Jen.
okay. So I
can't
know
see
a lot
her.
of work went into this, and I think based on Aubrey's comment and Piers, I think we might want to be actually a little bit more aggressive. I think, and I have no idea what these numbers will turn out because I don't have the spreadsheet, so the fancy spreadsheet, but I would maybe start with 100,000 years 1 through 3, double that years 4 through 6, 325, 7 through 9, to get to the 500,000 in year 10, and then level it from then on. So the first 10 years will be painful, and then it levels, and then to Tanya's point, it kind of like, it feels it's less and less and less and less every year.
If the model that's agreed to or the version that's agreed to looks absolutely nothing like this, that is entirely fine.
Okay.
Brian just wanted to get the ball rolling, and I thank him once again for that. It was great.
I want your autograph on this. It's
No pride, no ownership on this one.
What are the numbers again for 1 through 3?
So I did 100, 200, 325, and then after year 10 we get to 500,
All the way down.
and then all the way down.
So what I can do,
Is run that?
we can run that, we can update that, and I can send it to everybody, and I can put it in font 25. So that everybody can read it, right? So, but like, this is the way it's set up is, and anybody that will look at it, I'll admit, it's not a complicated model, so it's not like I gotta do anything crazy. But if the final version that's agreed to looks nothing like this, but yet we agree to something, and we agree to funding it, whatever, like, that is a victory.
Yep.
Yes.
Period. And the fact that there's so much passionate conversation about this tonight, that in and of itself, on top of the fact that there is the commitment that you made mention of in February, that's progress. So I'll happily update this.
Okay.
I can't get you an electronic version of this, but we can get it to you.
Okay, that would be great.
Mr. Watson, I can call you with the numbers of what the liability is, right? So we can all cover off on some to-dos.
Yeah, and then just one more thing, Mary, I'm sorry. Then, because my thought process was that is for Millville, that's like, it's roughly the numbers. It's 30,000 for Millville, it's 70,000 for Blackstone. So we have 3 years to be like, hey, we're doing a slow roll. We're starting small. It's $30,000 across everyone in Millville. It's $70,000 across everyone in Blackstone. But this is coming, and we're doing it because we don't want to be like, I don't know what would happen if someone said, okay, we're calling your liability today. Like, what would we do? I think we would all leave town. That's what I would do. I would pack a suitcase and run away. How would you find this much money? So this is like, the liability is overwhelmingly large. We're going to start small, but get ready because this number is going to get bigger and bigger, and we can kind of map out, it's going to be 30,000 years 1 through 3. It's going to be 60,000 years 4 through 6. It's going to get a little bit bigger every year. So just be prepared for this so that I just don't want us to get this feels soul crushing, the number. And this way we're kind of digging out a little bit.
But that number you brought out, I think Jane said was March 10th is the deadline.
Yeah.
For voting
Our
on
budget.
That's
yeah,
our
budget
budget.
hearing.
That's our budget hearing.
I mean, it's the second, you're talking huge numbers here to hurry up and be like, all right, hey,
It's
let's
only
go,
30,000
let's
for this year.
Come on.
It's trying 100,000 for this
see
year.
here, Mary's patiently waiting, so I'll go to Mary and then I'll, because you're right, but go ahead.
So the OPEB is only one side of the teeter-totter. We have to fund our pension liability too. Where are we with our pension?
Now I'm going to cry.
Because when the pension, if we're caught up on our pension, maybe we can start to slide more money towards the other side of the teeter-totter when we get there. I don't know where we are on the pension.
7.7 million at June 30th, 2020.
And when will we be totally funded on our pension?
Good luck with that.
See, so there's two parts to this. It's not just the OPEB, it's the pension.
And that's not your teachers, right? The teachers are at the state. That liability.
I was going to say,
That's not us. 39 million.
That's not us.
But that's
Okay.
not you. It's,
we don't have
it is you.
I'm like, wait, that's
We don't have it that much.
This is where we break from the week.
Yeah, we're breaking from the week. Mr. Watson, that's not us.
we do have pension liabilities
I
that
know
we
that.
pay on an
Yeah.
ongoing basis.
Yeah, that's true.
Pay for the Worcester
Matt,
Right.
Right, yeah, that's fair.
Matt, could you go back to Parker? On the February meeting, he brought up a number somewhere in there, and I don't remember where it came in. He threw out 450,000.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if he was looking for a stop point at 450. Can you just circle back with him on that?
I already emailed him and asked him what number he was thinking might be a good starting number for
I thought he threw out
based on the numbers.
I might be wrong. I thought he threw out 450 in the conversation, but I might have been wrong. So I know we had a lot of dialogue that night.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, for some reason, that 450 number sticks in the back of my head. Because the other number was, I guess, 5 years or whatever, 1,250,000 is where it's going to grow because of what you have coming on the books for retirees. So that's another thing we have to kind of look at on the scale.
I'll circle back. I'll circle back with Parker.
Thank you.
Tammy.
I just wanted to confirm, we're trying to get a number. We are trying to come up with a number by March 10th, to your point over there. So if the proposal is to take this conversation out from where we are to the town administrators and then out, that has to be a kind of quick turnaround time. And that my only concern with that is that the we becomes a much smaller number. And then when we have all been on the town floor, or I've actually been to the Millville town meeting also, but when the we of FinCom and the Board of Selectmen and the school committee go to town meeting truly with the mindset of
Unified voice.
we can get things done.
Yep.
When we go and then we get to the floor and suddenly it's you or you or you made these recommendations, that gets much more uncomfortable and less chance of moving town people to understanding, because then it becomes a bicker session and you lose the whole sight of what OPEB actually is. And you know, so I think my only concern with sort of not coming up with a thought process with this team is that then it becomes the town, and no disrespect to the town administrators, but then it becomes, I'm more scared about us coming up with a number and then pushing it out. I mean, I think that's why we're here, is to come up with a number together and work through it, to get into the weeds, but come up with something here.
These numbers are just based upon the fact that we had a $50,000 starting.
Well, correct.
Yeah, that's
sure.
That's
And
it.
so, you know, when we say March, so I'm going to answer the question over, the point over here. When we say March 10th, that's when we have to present a budget to our community that they can, actually before March 10th, because on March 10th, they can come and respond to it and ask us any questions. So they have to have that picture. They have to have the picture that has this page, sorry, I'm throwing things, and this page, or whatever, as one, so the budget book. But we can, on March 10th, say, you know, here's the picture we're painting for you, and it includes, you know, $100,000 contribution from the joint communities, towards the other post-employment benefit liability. And then the town administrators can meet, the finance committee, the board of selectmen, they can look at that, how that pertains to their numbers. But on March 24th, we have to certify a budget that goes into your town. What do you call it? So there's time for a little tweak, which is rightfully so, because community members may come in and say, what the, you know, change, you know, we don't like this, we don't like that. We have further discussions built in here. So March 10th doesn't have to be the drop dead date. Yeah. March 24th has to be the drop dead date.
No, but I mean, everybody's dancing around the initial thing of who's going to throw out the first number and then what's going to be.
Well, that was something I was.
You know what I mean? That's what I'm saying. And I'm not saying it has to be thrown out tonight.
Right.
But she threw out an initial number.
Right.
People are starting to sit here and, okay, you see people picking up pens and calculators. You know what I mean? Like, so
It's not scary.
Actual things are happening. It's not, okay, well, our town administrator and Millville's, they're going to go into a room, they're going to talk, and then they're going to go back to the schools. Like, let's just do it now and get it done, and not this March 10th and the 24th. Like, well, that's going to be a crutch.
No, I get it, but at the end of the day, we can talk about, everybody can just name a number. You guys have to vote and put the number in your budget at the end of the day. None of us here are gonna be voting on that number. So like, I totally agree, like, I get to your point, but like, you guys have to say the number, and then it goes through the process, Board of Selectmen, Finance Committee, and then to town meeting, and you know, it can get amended on the floor, like, anything can happen, right?
It's exactly that point too. So I know we have the long-term plans, which makes sense, and I totally get it, but we might do something different this budget cycle than in the future, right? So just for instance, we might say, for, you know, purposes of time and conversation, maybe we just put forward, you know, 50,000, whatever that number is, for this year, and then give folks time to talk and do what they need to do. And the next budget cycle, we're going to come back, we're going to lay this out, we're going to show exactly what it looks like, and the number is going to be X, 100,000, whatever it is.
I'm okay with that too.
So here.
That's what we're doing
Kim,
now.
I'll go, yeah.
That's what
no
we've
commitment
been
to
doing.
that.
So,
We revisit it every year.
well, so here's the thing, that goes to the point, to Aubrey's point, that this needs to be a separate line. Because if you have one town vote one way and another town vote another way, we don't get a budget at all. So it can't be in the operational dollars, you can't can't be on your school budget line, because if there's any fear that it's not gonna go through, then that jam, I mean, that,
But this wasn't on last year's budget really, as far as like thinking about moving forward. So now that it came up a couple weeks ago or whatever, and now we're talking about it tonight, we know moving forward what we need to do.
Yeah, I think what she's trying to say, right, is the way it works is both budgets have to be exactly the same, or they fail, right?
Right,
So
correct.
if Millville goes in and they tweak it $1, literally $1, we have no budget.
we have no budget.
And then it causes a whole series of new political obstacles.
Obviously,
on
we're
the
going to
school.
rely on communication between school and town administrators.
Well, of course, you can't, you can't help a resident getting up there and changing the number and it getting
Cannot.
voted through. That
But
happens.
if it's not in the operational dollars,
Then it
it's,
doesn't affect it.
Now, is there a way for a buffer to be in there? As far as like what you just said, if it gets to the point to where if we're off?
no.
No,
It has to
we
be-
can't,
No,
yeah, we
so-
have to charge according to the statutory method, yeah.
So if we have a OPEB liability line and you all have it, for the BMR school district in your budget, and it's 72% of $100,000 and 28% of $100,000, and the town of Uxbridge votes not to do their 73%. I'm picking a town, so I'm not picking on anyone.
What do they
I
have to
won't
do
pick
with
on any one town. So that, one of the towns votes not to do it, then we don't get to collect the 72% from the other town. So it's an all or nothing, take it. Now, if one town votes to do it and the other town doesn't, the school committee can vote to lower it so it meets the threshold of both towns. The school committee can vote to say, nope, we're sticking with our number, in which case it goes to the one town that voted against it or changed it or edited or whatever it's called. And that town can either choose to ignore it, in which case it moves forward anyway, or that town can say, no, we're sticking to our guns, we're not gonna have it, and that's the super town.
So you need three, you essentially need three. You need a high, a mid, and a low then.
No.
No, there's only one budget can go in the
I'm
budget.
saying as far as numbers wise, that, like what you just said.
We just need the two towns to agree to it, because we can't change the percentage.
Tim's been patiently waiting, and then we'll go to Peter.
Okay, I'm gonna cut through this. I'm gonna suggest $150,000 this year and for the next 3 years. That gives us an opportunity to come back to the table over the next 36 months and work out a realistic plan.
As one member of the Board of Selectmen, I'm not gonna enter into that kind of an agreement without the town administrator and the other members of the Board of Selectmen. It's too important for them not to be present.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's there.
It's their number,
yeah.
But we were just asked to throw out a number.
It's not us.
That's a starting point. Okay, so you're saying 150, so now our selectmen can take it back and make it talk.
Yeah.
So there we go. We have a starting point.
So we can do the 150 through years, what was 150 years 1 to 3? Was there anything after that, 4 through 6, or just going to kind of sit tight with the one?
So we have it as an action item, and so we can propose something right here and now, and we can have you all take it back to your towns, and we can get feedback from you before the 10th, but I'm not comfortable with $150,000.
Well, I mean, I think this is where the discussion comes, because we can say 150,000 in FinCom, yeah, I'm looking over there, but FinCom can be thinking there's no way, that's not in our thought process. That's where I think, Brian, to the point, like, when we come up with a number that we talk about here and you think, I mean, you collectively think it's in the ballpark, then we're moving forward with something that's in the ballpark. But if I mean, I don't know that 150,000 is in the ballpark right now. I don't know. I would think that's high, but I don't know what I heard 500 somewhere,
I think to
so I don't
Ryan's
know.
point is, I don't think we can genuinely give you an opinion on
Understood.
150 to
Understood.
50,000 without speaking to the town administrator and going through all those.
Sure.
So
Well,
that's why,
and
you know,
let's
it's
not
tough.
forget, your town administrator hasn't seen this yet.
Right,
Well,
that's what I was gonna say, just for like Millville FinCom, we don't really do anything on the fly like this, like
Right.
it takes
Sure.
a lot of,
Yep.
we need all of our stabilization balances, we need our latest capital plan, we need our latest budget numbers to be able to commit to our budget to be tight. So.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a full commitment. I think it's here's what we're thinking, and then do that part. But I think if we if, school committee comes up with this wackadoodle number and you are already saying, no way, then it's
The reason I picked
pointless.
100 is because with the cannabis revenues that Peter and I have discussed, I know that we can do it without raising taxes further.
So that's exactly,
so I can get this paid
Do
right
draft
now,
budgets that
and I
show
don't have to
forward.
go to Aubrey or anyone
That's
and say.
that's helpful,
So that's
thank you.
why I can I know that we have room for this. So
Yeah.
that's why I picked 100.
So go to Mr. Watson.
Hey, can you, I mean, I know it's being debated in court right now, but just so the rest of the town knows, we're holding all the marijuana revenues aside because it's actually not clear that you can use that for anything other than to offset impacts from the marijuana sales. So we made a decision early on to not spend any of those dollars.
Fly by the seat of our pants in Millville. I'm very comfortable with my statement.
But listen, there's a number out there right now.
Yes, Mr. Watson, please.
No, I'm just letting everyone else know before they go, we got 300,000 kicking around.
But it is
town
revenue.
has,
You record the revenue.
for many years,
I agree with
put 250,000 aside. Now, it affects, and you need to talk with the actuaries, because they change the assumptions if you have a fixed amount going forward to infinity, okay, the 250,000. They change some of the assumption numbers that affect the liability. So you need to, before you start changing numbers in year 3, you need to consider that.
So I'm going to ask Brad to run what Jennifer suggested. So the 100, 200, 325, and 500 moving on for 20 years. We'll have Matt talk to our actuary to see what significant jump that makes. But that's what we'll present to the community for them to also respond to on the 10th. So that way, if any administrators have some response that they can share with us on the 10th, we have time between the 10th and the 24th to tweak and have something for the town floor.
But if I could, since I'm an administrator,
Attended the meeting.
I don't know how much smarter I'll be between now and the 10th, right? So my experience with OPEBs, I don't care how smart the person is, that's a very confusing concept. So if you break it out as a separate line item, that makes sense if we were smart enough to commit to a funding schedule tonight. I don't know that you want to necessarily have a separate line item. Wouldn't be my recommendation in this budget if you were just adding 100 grand with the group's commitment to really come up with a good schedule, which requires actuaries to do stuff and see some other schedules, I think, that support the longer-term plan to get to some percentage that folks are comfortable with of funding, like 15 or 20. I'm just throwing those out as arbitrary numbers in 2040, or the plan that Jen described. So my recommendation, based on my knowledge of this stuff, would be put 100 grand in your budget. I'm not speaking for Blackstone, I'm not speaking, but I think we can find a way to fill that, add our share of that in Millville in our overall budget at this stage. And still, because we're trying to resolve this in one session here tonight. It's not that easy.
I don't think we're going to resolve this in one session, but I think the two key components that we are discussing are we need some sort of mechanism and we need some sort of amount that we want to throw out for this first year. And not to disagree with you, Peter, one of my biggest concerns representing the district, the administration from the district, and sorry if I'm not speaking for you, Jason, but I worry about saying, yep, we'll put it in this budget, because that's what we keep doing and keep talking about, and then people have less of an understanding of what the OPEB cost is, as opposed to saying, the public needs to understand this is not erasers and textbooks for our kids. So when it becomes have the district figure out where they're taking that from in the budget. We'll put it into the budget that we're paying, but it just seems like lumped into our operating budget. I feel like that's where we need to bring the awareness to the community to say, like Aubrey, I like your point. This is a separate line. And you know what? If you don't fund it then. But the school's going to move forward with their operating budget. And again, not to say that that's what would happen, but I think it just needs to be clear that this is a separate piece that has to be funded for the future retirees. This is not about keeping the kids educated and making sure they have what they need in their classrooms. And if it just gets lumped into the budget, I fear that, as has happened, it always just becomes, well, where are you going to find that money, district? And we have been
I
clear
have
in
made an
saying we can't.
executive decision that we're going to go with Jennifer's plan as the paperwork, that Brad's going to create a new chart for us as a separate line, and if we choose to do that differently between the 10th and the 24th, we'll have time to have discussion, but we've
There you go.
got to move this.
Can I throw one more thing?
One more thing. Wrench? No.
So, Dr. DeFalco,
I'm retiring.
You guys had originally put in, what was it?
There is an account created,
Yes.
and there's 50,000 going into that
Oh,
account.
there's 50,000. Is that in your operational budget every year?
No.
No. Okay, so that was just
It
initial.
was a one
There
time.
was
Actually, for this year.
Yeah.
Not this budget
There
for
was
next
zero,
year.
you guys put 50 in as a district out of your budget.
Yep.
And now it's on both towns.
Yep.
So the school itself will not be contributing 50 grand every
Correct.
year moving forward.
Correct.
Okay, just asking for clarification on that.
All right. Are we good? We can move on to the elephant in the room.
Good for you.
That's the elephant?
Yeah.
That's the elephant.
We may be able to make this a smaller little elephant. Maybe.
I hope so.
So,
Thank you, Greg, for bearing with us.
yes, poor Greg, thank you so much for sitting through all of this.
Without a mask. I've never seen his face before.
The last item in our agenda is on our capital assessment. And one of the things that we were intentional about was making sure that we met with each town's capital planning committees before this meeting, so that it wouldn't be the first time that at least some of our team members around the table have had a chance to see these numbers. And so I'll just explain very quickly what's in your packet, and then maybe we can talk about next steps, and that might help us kind of move this piece forward. What is in your packet is essentially, if you recall, going back to the capital improvement plan that Greg and his team put together for us, that long-range plan that had that astronomical number of, somewhere north of $61 million. I think it was closer to 80, frankly, by the end. 81,366,505 is the exact amount. What we did was we wanted to make sure that we could break those numbers down so that the community could actually see, how do we get those numbers? What constitutes that bottom line? Let me say up front that the majority of this number, not all of it, but the majority of it is the high school. So we should just kind of call that out right in front. And then Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's around 60 million that I think is actually allocated specifically for the high school. And as everyone around this table knows, the school committee will be voting on March 10th as to whether to submit a statement of interest to the Mass School Building Authority for a project. We don't know what, because we have to be accepted in, and then there needs to be a feasibility study done if the town so agrees to that feasibility study. So we understand there's a lot of moving, thank you so much, Scott. We understand there's a lot of moving pieces with this. One of the things that we are coming forward with is, as far as a way to do this, because like the OPEB conversation is a big conversation, this is a big conversation too, that we actually think this warrants a lot of conversation, a lot of follow-up conversation. And so what we are putting forward is perhaps a smaller group, representative of those around the table, actually get together to look at this and put some prioritization to it. And so that might actually help ease the burden a little bit tonight of kind of going through this whole document. But will also help prioritize what we need to do.
So you think like,
Tammy, go ahead.
oh, sorry.
No, I just wanted to say that I put water on that table, so if anybody else doesn't want any, feel free to help yourself. I saw that you went somewhere else to get yours, but.
So you mean like a representative from each committee or board just get together, like at a workshop? Okay.
You want a workshop, or are we doing a subcommittee?
You're thinking of a workshop model where we could sit down, get a few people around the table, someone from each of the boards, the committees, and really just kind of hammer this out, because there's so much here.
Yeah.
And the big piece is what happens with the high school, and ultimately if that gets accepted in, through the pipeline, what does that feasibility study actually bear out? There's a lot of moving parts to this particular piece, so it might be better, we may be better off spending our time sitting down in a smaller group with people from each one of those boards, kind of hammering through some of those options.
Can I make a suggestion there?
Please, yeah.
As you consider doing this, consider a working model where each one of your first 4 meetings is at one of the schools. And you walk around and you look at this so that you understand what it means, because this is our take on your buildings. And so we're looking at it completely objectively.
That's a great idea.
And the thing to do is to get used to, or get a handle on how we rank things. And the best way to do that is to go out there and walk around the building. And I'll certainly come with you and say, this is why this got that ranking. And you can then say, okay, I understand that. And then you can make a collective decision about where it fits in the hierarchy of needs. This is, until you start doing that, this is ours. And when you start doing it, it becomes yours.
Yeah.
And that's the piece that Jason's trying to convey, and we've been trying to convey in part of the meetings running up to tonight, is at one point you take this, it's a live document, and you start arranging it to fit your desires for the buildings. The reality of it is that the buildings don't go away, and they don't heal themselves. But you can start to pick where you start to invest. So I think the working group model is a great way to get a number like this, which in towns are not used to having. Get it to be part of your annual, monthly discussions at your committees, so that it becomes part of what you're talking about all the time.
That report that he had the last time we were talking, is the stuff on there for what has to be done for the state for this year?
No, what has to be done for the state in terms of asbestos, you mean?
Or
That's
for next
already-
year?
That's in the budget,
Okay.
the earlier budget.
Yeah, so we got that.
So anything that would need to move off of this list would be above and beyond the capital that's already on your budget page.
Okay.
Yep.
But then to piggyback on his question, is there anything on this list that the state is demanding that we do?
Is that
or
what's
if we-
coming off of this?
Yeah, if we don't do.
No.
No.
No. Okay.
Nope.
So I make a recommendation that we all go back to our boards, and at the next meeting, we can appoint somebody to the committee.
A working group, a small working group.
Could I
whatever you
just
wanna call it.
ask one quick question? Are these numbers the same numbers as in the original proposal, or have they been changed?
I'm not sure on that, Mr. Watson. This is totaling to 81.3, so I'm thinking this is an updated one. Because the report totals to 60, this totals to 81. This is carrying, I think, 2021 numbers. That was carrying early 2020 numbers.
Okay, so this is.
But it's all the same items, just updated pricing.
So is this the same that we looked at in our capital committee last night?
That's not.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, that's just.
And is it possible with totals or subtotals on our version of this?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, yeah.
We have it electronically. It's
On the side on this computer.
The totals are on the side.
Yeah, they're 20.
And I know, Tara was starting to organize it, 1 and 1, or you were starting to do that, or? That is, so if it's a high priority and it's a big safety issue, or if it's in poor condition and if they're 1 and 1,
Oh, I see, yeah.
it's a bigger priority than
Yes.
4 and 4.
That's exactly right.
And then
That's what it's just saying.
So on that guidance, so it seems like 1-in-1s we have to do, 4-in-1s we completely don't have to do, and then the middle is a gray area?
Now, it's one, if you look at it as one is critical to the mission and function of the school. So that is your system priority 1 through 4. So there's a priority 1 is something that's absolutely essential to make the school a school. 4 is something that's essential to make it a building that doesn't fall over. So think doors and hallways, work for schools, streets, and fields, restaurants. So that's 1 through 4. The next column over, system rating, is its condition. So category 1 is very important for it to be a school, and category 1 means it's in really bad condition. So they are juxtaposing scales. As you go up on one and down on the other, it's less important to you.
But I'm right in the 1-in-1 is.
1-in-1s are where you want to get.
1-in-1, sure.
It's for us, 1 and 2s.
Is there a weight that was just a rise? Generally weight like a 125 for the system priority.
You do it, you do it by the amount of contact time with teachers, starting with kids. So the amount of contact time with the kids, second is the amount of contact time with the teacher, and then third is it's just essential to the building. And by contact time, it could be lighting, and it could be a broken staircase.
So it will vary from season.
That's your work. That's when it becomes.
That's what they start.
Very much that.
So then I won't start trying to come up with a formula on that because I'll go through all of that work and everyone will say, no, that's not how we rate it.
But just to follow the 1-in-1, Greg, if I could, if you use as an example, down in the high school, interior stair railings, on the first page, that's a 1-in-1. And you have year 23, so that's right away, $50,000 need.
Yes.
And so the working group would come forward with saying, well, even in spite of all the other big stuff, one might argue that's a gotta do thing because there's legal safety exposure there that's not, can't be ignored, right? Especially now that we know it. That's a lot of movement there.
There's a lot to cover.
So then if we have a subcommittee to review this, so then what do we talk about, like the interest and all that here, or no?
What?
Statement of interest moving forward, or anything?
Oh, so no, yeah, so the statement of interest is separate and distinct, separate from this process.
This is important, sir. Without this, you don't stand a chance to decide. With this, you do. But that's as far as they marry one another.
Yeah.
A question. We got numbers here for 2023. How do we possibly, was 1,876,000. Okay. How do we possibly come up with a funding number for that by the 10th of the month?
We won't.
Okay, so all these years are going to roll into future years down the line. Okay.
There is no, I mean, we have to do the asbestos, but there's no way that subcommittee group meets in schools and walks through and designs something in 2 weeks.
But I'm looking at the high school, halfway down the high school one, there's a 1-to-1 for interior stair rails. If the subcommittee feels that has to be done sooner rather than later, is there like a number that goes into this budget, or we're not, that's not even?
Not now, there's not.
Okay, all right, just
So we
making
either have
sure
to do a November, like a special town meeting or whatever.
But that being said, if the town owns the building and during the work group, we're going through this and Millville says, holy cow, we want to fix those railings in the building because of whatever reason, Millville can choose to take whatever funding they want and fix I'm just saying, to that end, it's not that the subcommittee can't. Blackstone, Uxbridge, I'll start saying, I'm from the Wachusett district, so if Paxton would like to look at their building and then start contributing money, then they can, because it's technically their building.
Sure.
Matt, has the statement of interest been submitted to the state yet, or what's the game plan with that?
We will vote on it as a committee to move it forward on the 10th of March.
So it gets submitted in March. We hear back in
June,
July-ish,
August,
right?
September, October.
So at that point, we kind of know like what's going to go forward at that point, because then we go on a clock for 270 days. So we would at that point, like some of the capital projects for like the high school and stuff, we may want to kick that can down the road just a little bit because we don't know, when it comes back. So I think this is more of a conversation for later in the summer, once we know what the state's going to do.
Yes, and there are still a significant number of projects in the other buildings that need to be looked at.
Right. No, but I'm just saying as far as like the high school goes, or even this building here. No, not this building, because it's the other end of the renovation, the $6 or $7 million that we're looking at.
You're right. So we would probably want to wait on making big decisions on the high school end or this building, but there are certain safety issues, like you said,
we need to get
that if it's not, we can't let them hang out for 4 or 5 years until we see something happening.
But we would know in the next 6 months.
Absolutely.
Where we're at.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so this asbestos abatement stuff that we got the last time is already in the
That's already in.
That's in the
next
budget.
3 years budgets, how it's laid out here with 21, 22, and 23.
So no, we can't do that. We can only put it into the budget that's going in front of you now. So it's only in this year's budget, but know that it's coming. It'll be in there whether or not. Omri and then Mary.
Keeping in mind that this is so down the road, how do the costs get updated in light of the fact that the cost of materials is inflating at an incredibly rapid rate right now?
Hey, Greg, these are today's dollars, right?
You generally update them on an annual or 6-month basis. You can also, if you really want to lose a lot of sleep, you can escalate them out to each one of those breakouts to 2023, 2025, 2030. And at this point, everyone's using somewhere in the range of about 6.5%.
What, 6.5?
So if you do that, and I already did it for this at 4% compounded, and you are over 138 million.
So that's compounded, not over the life.
Compounded.
And that you're talking about, like,
take these numbers, and for each one of those numbers in the year that it comes due, compound it out, and you are picking up about 50% over that 81 million. A little bit over 50%. That's just the problem with it, and that's a 4%, which we actually seen in the last year and a half.
Brad, you had if I was to be the poster child, that was that thing. I wish I had it on you.
I think we're all looking at you, Brad, like it was like, ooh, there you go. Mary.
So I know there was a recommendation to do a subcommittee to look at the capital. I know we also already have the capital planning subcommittee. I don't know what's going to happen to that, or if that's going to be the same committee, because there are representatives from both towns on that. The other thing is, if we go forward with the statement of interest, the MSBA is going to require a building committee. So I think it would be prudent to just make it one.
Well, so we originally talked that there's 2 different components here. That one is the capital with the statement of interest to move the project, to work with the community, to get people on, because this is not only a sell around this table, this is a sell around if the statement of interest goes forward and then the feasibility study, that's a significant expense to the towns. But if after the feasibility study, the project goes forward, that's beyond significant. That makes everybody's eyes roll in backwards. So there's a group of people, and quite frankly, I'd love it to be more community people, like parents and families who say, we need to go in this direction. And that's a sales pitch, if you will. That's a move forward, here's the whys, here's the whens. This is we don't want people tripping on sidewalk. This is the capital plan that Jennifer's been asking for 4 or 5, how many?
I only been on the committee for 3 years, so.
Okay, 3 years. Well, Adrian before you.
I was gonna say.
Adrian before you.
Oh, yeah.
You know, this is that 5-year plan, like what do we need to do to our buildings so that we don't keep kicking this can down the road and get 138 million. I mean, this is, to me, as important of the discussion as open. Because these, you know, the buildings, we may or may not get accepted. But there's got to be a working committee that's working on
2 separate pieces.
building
But that
committee.
committee that's open right now is working on keeping our school open and not getting shut down because of the asbestos or whatever else, right?
No,
No,
that
it's
committee is
not.
focused on the statement of interest,
Yeah.
like the project with
We're making
MSBA.
sure the buildings aren't getting
Yeah,
shut
that's-
down.
we're doing
Administration
that.
is taking care of everything
We're doing
from the
that.
state level. But I think the marching direction that you guys referenced is perfect. We need a couple of people from the boards to say, okay, I'll join a working group to go through this data and figure out what makes sense for the town with respect to the capital plans. And then to Jane's point, and Mary's point, we have this capital planning subcommittee that really started as we weren't sure what was going to happen with it, and it has morphed into this statement of interest, potential MSBA project committee, and I think that will either simply disband or expand into the building committee. It's going to turn into the building committee once we move forward with the statement of interest. So I think a couple of people from each group, constituents, to do a working group on the actual financials, capital plan stuff, and then we have the building committee on the sales and the big picture of the statement of interest moving forward.
Agreed. Sarah, that sounds where you were, yeah.
Could I throw out one thing? I think.
No.
Of course. Take a look at whether or not we're putting too much to capital and whether some of the items would be better worked on under the heading of repairs and maintenance before they get to the point where you have to turn them into a capital item.
Those are great conversations for that working group.
Yes, yeah.
Which is exactly what your working group started doing.
Yeah, that's
knocking off
that
the,
is what we started doing.
yes.
I have requested several times some costing out of a realignment plan involving the consolidation of the elementary schools at JFK and the consolidation of the middle school and high school at this building. And I haven't gotten any response to that yet.
We had similar conversations last night, like to use this building as the high school, and but there weren't fields and things like that, and we were told that that's the feasibility study. So we're going to put forth a feasibility, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. So they're going to put forth the feasibility study on the high school because that's the building that has kind of the most need, and they're going to look at, oh, well, what do you have available? Let's see what we can do. So, because I said something similar, like, why are we investing all
Why are
this
we
money
picking
in
the worst building?
Why are we picking the worst building that's going to cost the most money?
Right.
So this was like, we're doing that on purpose because then they'll look at all the other buildings and say, you picked the worst building. Can you take one of the others?
So my question comes, and I guess it would be a question for you more, or for Mary. How often do you submit a statement of interest, it gets accepted, and is there a radical change to what was submitted?
As long as you follow to ground the school that you identified, and as long as you follow that, if you say, look, I need to address my high school, that's the worst building you have. The feasibility study is designed to find the best educational and economical answer to that question. So you wouldn't submit your elementary schools because that doesn't drive enough of the discussion, neither educationally nor financially. So you end up putting the high school on the table. Then the feasibility goes exactly as Jennifer said. look at what you can do. And the MSBA requires you by law to look at replacement, renovation, modification, consolidation, whatever might be a feasible way to address that. And so looking at it now is going to have two potential impacts. And it'll probably have a little bit of both. It will either shadow or shade public opinion towards whatever the feasibility study goes and does, or it will presuppose what the feasibility should go to. Neither one of those is where you want to start. So you take a facilities assessment that says this is what you need physically. You take a master plan that says this is what we need to do educationally and this is what we own physically. That's what we just finished. And then you say, okay, there's no way this town can survive with that high school without a significant investment. So your two significant investments in the building that is past its due date is close it or renovate it, replace it, in the same words. That's what the feasibility study is designed to do, is to take you down that study. And you will indeed study this building because it does have it's got a good setup from an educational point of view, certainly for a middle school. Could it be expanded for high school? We looked at it, probably. Then you have to look at, and once again, you'll be required to do it in the MSBA study, what would it cost to own it? If this was the middle school, high school, and it was a sports complex a mile and a half away, what's it cost to run that? And that becomes a discussion as well. So I hear you, and I'm not ignoring you on that request. We looked at it when we wrote the report, and I just think that I'm hesitant to go that way or go too much further down and get more stuff out into the public. Because right now there's a dozen options out there that are being discussed, all with the intention of focusing everybody on how much work that high school needs. And I'll just keep talking because I waited 2 hours. I can do that, right?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
certainly can.
There's 60 million of this in round numbers is the high school. And your share of the grant to get a new high school is 55 million, which includes fixing this building. Why wouldn't you shoot for that high school?
My understanding is there's not going to be any state funding for this building.
Right.
Whichever way you go.
Right, but your share at whatever it was, the two towns share, at 45% of the cost of the high school and 100% of the cost of this is less than the cost of just fixing the high school as it is, which does not include improving it for the educational needs.
Right.
So that's why we kept focusing on the high school. And it's like, it is the building. Now how you answer that need is the feasibility study.
Right. My concern is that there will be a bias in that process, and there is a bias because that process results in, if you get accepted, the likelihood is that that's the project that's going to be done. And that's the project that's going to be funded. If there is a project, if you submit a project that is much less expensive for the town, when you even netting out some other configuration, the one that I suggested in particular, even if you applied for state funding and got some smaller percentage, but it turned out to be much cheaper to do it that way, that possibility goes by the boards.
No, it doesn't. Because you can't get to talking about a high school replacement unless you submit for high school. And you can't submit for high school at a building that's not high school. So you can submit for this building and it would come in, you would be submitting for a 20-year-old building that's in pretty darn good shape. Chances of you getting accepted for this is pretty slim to none. Mm-hmm. Because they're going to look at this and they're going to look at your master plan, they're going to look at your facilities logs, and they're going to say, why should we invest in this when you have a building that's in much need? So the idea of saying, let's look at the high school, let's use the high school as our target. And one of the avenues, because you get to participate in the feasibility study, it's not someone just going off and doing and coming back and saying, look what we wrote. You get to be part of that, saying, what I'd really like to do is to run to ground, what would it take to make this building work as a middle school, high school? And the other thing to bear in mind, I'm jumping all over the place here, sorry. The feasibility study, when it goes out on the street, is going to say, to study a project with an estimated cost of between 20 million and 120 million. There's that range is typical what goes out somewhere in maybe not 20 to 120, but certainly, Mary, what are we saying now, 40 to 110?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a 60 or 70 million dollar range. And it's done to not skew the interest in going forward. Yeah, so we developed that number at the end of the master plan as a reality check, because you needed something to compare this to and something to compare what it really does cost to build a building. But the state won't put that RFP out if it said it's going to be between 100 and 120 million. It's going to be somewhere in this range. Now let's go study it and we'll find out what happens. The piece that's going to drive looking at all of the buildings as part of the feasibility study is your enrollment projections and the way they're dropping and what you own relative to buildings. And I would kind of expect that the feasibility study is going to come back and say, yeah, 2 schools probably works best for you. And where that high school is, I wouldn't hazard a guess right now if it's here, if it's over at the existing school site, if it's at another piece of land somewhere in town, I don't know. That's the study.
Yes, so I understand that thinking, but I also understand that this town could do other things with that high school site. That doesn't play into the projections at all, and it doesn't really, I don't think, get to the issue of potentially reducing the net cost of that high school to both towns. I'm not talking about just Blackstone, I'm talking about both towns. If we could do something else with that land, that would be it could be a significant issue for the town of Blackstone in particular, because we might be able to sell that land, we might be able to convert it to some sort of tax or revenue generating use.
That has nothing to do with building a new school right now.
So Greg or Jane, could you explain who owns what?
Yeah, so currently the district owns this building and the high school building. The town of Millville owns Millville Elementary School, and the town of Blackstone owns the complex.
So if they're ruled surplus by the school committee and accepted by the DESI or whoever, then the 2 towns get their individual buildings back, and there's no strings attached. They don't have to buy each other out. They can do a study and decide we want to sell it, we want to make housing, whatever the best thing is for the town. So that's one of the reasons that the high school and the Hartnett were picked, because they're jointly owned already.
They're jointly owned. High school needs more work.
Right.
Middle school doesn't.
It's a better picture to print. It gives us better odds of because, and again, we have submitted before, not well, and not appropriately, and not with all our ducks in a row, but we have, and we've been turned down. So we have all our ducks in a row, we hope. We've picked the worst facility that needs the most work, that shows the greatest need, because you got to show need. You got to show need. Otherwise, there's there's 40, 50 schools that go in every year that have buildings that look worse than our high school. I mean, there are. And so you got to show need. We've done that legwork. And then I think you got to let the process play.
I think it's fair to add, though, that a lot of the questions people are asking, like Jeff, to your point, a lot of those questions, that's what the feasibility study is going to answer.
Correct.
Yes.
And those are done by the experts that are, they look at this thing and their goal is to say, all right, how do we best meet the needs of the students while maximizing the lifespan of the building, maximizing or minimizing the cost to each of the towns, and what is the absolute best way to do this by a group that this is what they do for a living. I'm not saying you guys, but this is what that group focuses on. Is all they do. Yep. So once they'll come back with a recommended option, like you said, it's a collaborative process. It's not something that they go off and to a black box and come back, 6 months later with here's a report, here's what you're going to do. It's, we get to talk to them throughout the process and get to put our inputs on there. And I think based on that input, some of your concepts about what we do with, once we get a better picture of where we may be going, that's probably when the time for those conversations about what do we do with other assets that could become available, that's when those conversations will probably start to happen. But I think until we've got that feasibility study and those steps with an idea, that's, it's endless, the possibilities of that.
So Jennifer and then Jerry.
Yeah, so Jeff, I had the same exact concerns that you did, because if we go through this whole feasibility study and then we go in front of Millville and say, so we need a portion of $97 million, that's not gonna happen, like ever. And I've said that in many meetings, I don't know if I've said it in this big of a meeting, but that portion is just not gonna happen. So I'm hoping in the feasibility study, and that's a lot of trust I'm putting in that hope, that.
Your trust, I understand that. My significant reservation is that we will end up submitting a much more expensive plan to the state, and the state will approve that plan. And when it's possible that there could have been a much less expensive plan to the town net, and it doesn't get fully vetted. Yeah. So that's why I would like to see, at the very least, some back of the envelope estimates as to how much it would cost to do the configuration that I suggested, using the same the same numbers and formulas that we use to develop the cost estimates for what the preferred plan is right now.
But to be clear, that's what that feasibility study, these guys they're not looking to sit there and say, suckers, they put in for 80 million, we're gonna, they could have done it for 20, but that's not their goal. Like they will, if there's a way we could, that's why he suggests that huge range is what they use typically. I'd actually pulled a few of these, be able to find them. I was looking at a couple of them, and the ranges are massive. I mean, it's, you're looking at,
It costs money to get those numbers. That's why the feasibility study has a cost attached to it. It costs money for estimators, it costs money for structural engineers, all the design consultants that you need to give you a true feasibility study. So that will come out in the wash.
Yeah.
Greg would just be guessing. He'd be stepping off a cliff to give us a number at this point.
Yeah. Right, but that's what we have right now with the configuration that we have right now.
No, that's not true. What you have right now is based on over a year, and if you count in the assessment study, over 2 years of work by a bunch of people sitting around this table, with the opportunity for everyone else around this table to come and join.
Right. No, I'm not talking about the result of the process. I'm talking about the numbers that you use to develop the cost for redoing the high school. That's all.
Now, the high school was fully programmed out to the number of rooms that were needed,
right,
the amenities that were needed, and then it was placed into the MSBA's current guidelines.
All I want to see is the same numbers and the same methodology applied to saying what would happen if we used
But
this building to do
I
the
know
same
that
thing.
I'm going to stop that because I know that request has come in before, and I know that the capital planning committee chose not to go in that direction. At this stage.
Well, that's news to me because I've made the request several times.
Yes, no, I know you have. I know you have. I have heard that request before, and the group went with the two configuration to submit the high school as the planned project.
But the feasibility study might come back and say.
It might come back. It absolutely could.
Yes.
And the discussion and the argument can absolutely be made that, I think there's maybe a better solution here. Absolutely.
I circle back to what I said earlier.
Isn't that the point of doing the workshop?
We could be we could be a dog chasing his tail right now. Until that statement of interest is submitted, okay, and it comes and accepted, then, this discussion has to happen for a later date. We could sit here for the next 2 hours having a discussion about this.
That'd be really fun.
Yes.
But until that statement of interest gets submitted and we get a positive response, then we can move forward.
Do you want somebody, are we gonna do this workshop, you wanna set a date, or we're gonna go back as towns and pick who's gonna be on it? Like,
That's the working group.
Yeah, it's the two, the state.
If you want to let us know who from your group wants to be on, that'd be, you can let Matt and I know. Yeah.
You need someone from BOSS, from Selectmen,
Capital.
Finance.
Committee.
I do need a few more. I have 5 minutes of free time on Fridays.
We need whatever representatives.
Yeah, and I know if there's not one from each, I think that's okay. I think our big concern is that whoever it is has the ability to reach then back to those communities.
We don't want to create a small working group of 36 people though.
One for
guys will be.
So that'll be 6, actually.
Electrician.
You can do that?
I'll be 3.
All right, we got Tammy, we got one, we're good. The rest of you?
You're joining that one?
A couple of us.
You guys are already doing capital.
The other one.
Believe in Robert's rules, actually that trumps all in Robert's rules.
Is Erin still there? Seriously?
Erin's still there.
She's probably sleeping on our couch.
All right. Is there anything else?
But are you warm? Because it's really cold here.
I know, we could probably put a blanket on. Do you have the AC on them?
Anything else?
I was gonna say, if
She won't
you're
show us
not,
the
then
blanket.
that's your problem.
You want to do it?
I have a motion to adjourn.
Jerry made a motion to adjourn.
Jen, are you the only?
You seconded?
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.